It's a blank slate.
Blank slate, everybody. And a hush. Oh, I did it right that time. Nice. Yes. Good evening. Welcome to the joint meeting of the City of Salem Budget Committee and the Salem Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee on this Wednesday, May 3rd, 2023. Would the recorder please call the roll?
Member Milton? Absent. Member Cohen?
Present.
Member Allen?
Here.
Member Tigan?
Here.
Member Vera Brandel?
Here.
Member Nishioka?
Here.
Member Phillips?
Here.
Member Gwen?
Here.
Member Gonzalez?
Here.
Member Julie Hoy?
Here.
Member Nordyke?
Here.
Member Chris Hoy?
Here.
Member Varney?
Here.
Member Dixon?
Here.
Member Curtis?
Here.
Member Chirac?
Here.
Vice Chair Brown?
Present.
Chair Stapleton?
I'm here. Thank you so much. Will you all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you. All right, Vice Chair Brown, do we have any additions or deletions?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do. We have additions agenda tonight, and I move for the approval of the additions to the agenda. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Second by Trevor Phillips, Member Phillips, sorry. Any discussion? All right, would the recorder please call the roll?
Member Cohen?
Aye.
Member Allen? Member Tigan?
Aye.
Member Vera Brandel?
Aye.
Member Nishioka?
Aye.
Member Phillips?
Aye.
Member Gwen?
Aye.
Member Gonzalez?
Aye.
Member Julie Hoy?
Aye.
Member Nordyke?
Aye.
Member Varney?
Aye.
Member Chris Hoy?
Aye.
Member Dixon? Member Curtis?
Aye.
Member Chirac?
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown?
Aye.
Chair Stapleton?
Aye, motion passes. Thank you so much. All right, we have nobody signed up tonight for public comment. So Vice Chair Brown, do you have a motion for the minutes?
Yes, Madam Chair, I do. I move for the approval of the minutes of April the 26th, 2023 meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Seconded by Member Chris Hoy. Any discussion? Seeing none, would the recorder please call the roll?
Member Cohen?
Aye.
Member Allen?
Aye.
Member Tigan?
Aye.
Member Vera Brandel?
Aye.
Member Nishioka?
Aye.
Member Phillips?
Aye.
Member Gwen?
Aye.
Member Gonzalez?
Aye.
Member Julie Hoy?
Aye.
Member Nordyke?
Aye.
Member Varney?
Aye.
Member Chris Hoy?
Aye.
Member Dixon?
Aye.
Member Curtis?
Aye.
Member Chirac?
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown?
Aye.
Chair Stapleton?
Aye, motion passes. Thank you so much. All right, we have two action items. Vice Chair Brown.
Yes, Madam Chair. I also move for the approval of errata 4 and 5. Do I have a second?
Second.
Ooh, I don't know who I'm going to give that to. All right, Member Phillips with the second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, would the recorder please call the roll?
Member Cohen?
Aye.
Member Allen?
Aye.
Member Tigan?
Aye.
Member Vera Brandel?
Aye.
Member Nishioka?
Aye.
Member Phillips?
Aye.
Member Gwen?
Aye.
Member Gonzalez?
Aye.
Member Julie Hoy?
Aye.
Member Nordyke?
Aye.
Member Varney?
Aye.
Member Chris Hoy?
Aye.
Member Dixon?
Aye.
Member Curtis?
Aye.
Member Chirac?
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown?
Aye.
Chair Stapleton?
Aye. We're getting really good at this. Yeah. Fantastic. And if it is all right with everybody, I would like to reorder the agenda, moving public hearings up before information reports. Seeing no issue with that, I would like to open the public hearing on the, let's see here, what are we calling this one? the continuation of the CIP process. Does that work for you, Josh? Okay. So we were at the wonderful point of asking questions, and I see one here by Member Nordyke.
Thank you. I just want to continue with the declaration of the potential conflict of interest that I began at the start of the capital improvement plan public hearing last week. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you to staff for answering all of our questions. It was really great to have that extra time to just think about all the improvements that we're going to see in our city. It's a really wonderful document that gets to move forward through here. So, seeing no questions, do we have a motion? Oh, I guess I need to close? There's no public comment? Okay. We'll close it, and I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion that we close public comments. I move for the approval of the capital improvement plan.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Member Chris Hoy. All right. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we're going to do it again. Recorder, please call the roll.
Member Cohen?
Aye.
Member Allen?
Aye.
Member Tigan?
Aye.
Member Vera Brandel?
Aye.
Member Nishioka?
Aye.
Member Phillips?
Aye.
Member Gwen?
Aye.
Member Gonzalez?
Aye.
Member Julie Hoy?
Aye.
Member Nordyke?
Aye.
Member Varney?
Aye.
Member Chris Hoy?
Aye.
Member Dixon?
Aye.
Member Curtis?
Aye.
Member Chirac?
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown?
Aye.
Chair Stapleton?
Aye. Motion passes. Thanks so much. All right. We open a public hearing for the state revenue sharing funds. Josh, take it away.
Good evening, Josh Eggleston, Chief Financial Officer. Chair Stapleton, members of the committee, tonight we'll be holding a public hearing for state revenue sharing. The public hearing was noticed in the April 6th edition of the Statesman Journal, and a staff report was included as item 6B in your agenda packet. The state of Oregon collects taxes assessed from various sales, including liquor, marijuana, cigarettes, as well as from highway trust funds. Some of these revenues are distributed back to cities based on their population, as determined by the PSU Center for Population Research. The city is budgeting a slight decline in revenue from the program. The League of Oregon Cities, in their most recent annual report on the program, notes that overall there is a slight increase in liquor and marijuana disbursement across the state, with a decrease in cigarette revenue. Generally statewide, there is a return to normal alcohol and marijuana sales that had previously spiked during the pandemic, as well as the impacts of Measure 110, which diverted some of these revenues previously provided to cities. The revenue generated from the program are used to offset the expenses in the Police General Fund Patrol Division. However, the state allows that this revenue given to cities can also be used to offset to property taxes assessed for city operations. It is important to note that this offset would further increase the challenges in the general fund. This is the first of two public hearings. The first tonight to hear about the possible uses of state revenue sharing funds, and the second will be with the City Council in June regarding the proposed uses of the revenue. Staff seek recommendation from the Budget Committee to the City Council to affirm that these revenues should be used to offset costs in the general fund associated with police patrol. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, at this time, is there any questions for staff? Yes, Member Tigan.
Thank you, Chair. Josh, can you, on page 4 of the slide that says the revenue projection, it says there's a reduction in overall liquor and marijuana sales and the impacts of Measure 110. Do you have a understanding projection of what the impact of Measure 110 is on the revenue to the city?
You know, I don't have that number right in front of me. Basically, what Measure 110 did is it diverted a large majority of the revenue sharing and then capped it, so it's not increasing each year. There are bills in the legislature every session that look to address that issue, but we haven't seen a resolution yet.
I feel like I remember in the past that we were able to fund how many patrol positions through this? A fraction of one, more than one?
More than one, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the reduction was several $100,000 that were diverted. So it would be several police patrol positions.
Several $100,000 a year because of Measure 110.
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. No more questions.
Yes, Member Schrock.
Thank you, Madam Chair, or President, maybe. I know we've been low on number of patrol officers, but could you give me just a brief reason why maybe some years ago it was decided to earmark state revenue sharing funds to that particular use?
I think the simplicity of it and the nexus there might be there with liquor, alcohol sales, that kind of thing.
Is there any more questions? Okay. That was painless. Josh? Do I close it before public comment? There is no public comment. We have no public comment, so I'm going ahead and close the public hearing, and we will see if there is a motion. Do we have a motion to approve the state revenue sharing fund and send to a second public hearing?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do. I would like to make a motion that the proposal fiscal year 2024 through fiscal year 2023 CIP be sent to the City Council for adoption.
Next one.
The next one, Chair, I also recommend that the uses of the state revenue sharing funds to the City Council. Do I have a second?
Second.
By Member Phillips. All right, is there any questions, conversations? No? Would the recorder please call the roll?
Member Cohen?
Aye.
Member Allen?
Aye.
Member Tigan?
Aye.
Member Vera Brandel?
Aye.
Member Nishioka?
Aye.
Member Phillips?
Aye.
Member Gwen?
Aye.
Member Gonzalez?
Aye.
Member Julie Hoy?
Aye.
Member Nordike?
Aye.
Member Varney?
Aye.
Member Chris Hoy?
Aye.
Member Dixon?
Aye.
Member Curtis? Member Chirac?
Aye.
Vice Chair Brown?
Aye.
Chair Stapleton?
Aye, motion passes. Thank you. All right, we'll be moving now to information items, and I would like to hand it over to our city manager.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Keith Staley. I am Salem's city manager, as you probably know, but maybe not everybody. And I want to go over the memorandum that was included in your additions agenda. I'm not going to go through it page by page. It starts on page 17 of your additions agenda, but I do want to highlight a few things in there. First off, I want to apologize to you for not starting with this. I think we started with the conversation about revenues and we quickly got into that discussion, but we sort of forgot about the why. Why are we asking for the additional revenues? And I think that kind of got lost in the sauce. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the why of the revenue requests. I'm not going to go over the revenue proposals. I think we spent enough time on that at the prior meetings, but I am going to spend some time talking about the staffing aspect of that. And I don't want to be, melodramatic about this, but this is a really serious and important conversation, probably the most serious and important conversation we have had and will have for many years to come. So we are definitely at one of those, Yogi Berra points in life where, we've come to a fork in the road and we got to take it. So I'm going to share some information with you this evening about my perspectives on how I'm approaching this challenge and hopefully to illustrate the impacts on the programs and services provided by the City of Salem. So thus far, I've really appreciated the conversations that we've had in this room and being part of that and observing it. It's been really healthy exchange, and I think it's helped me and staff understand where you're coming from and where we need to go, and hopefully this will continue to advance that. I want to spend a few minutes talking about the impacts that I see, and I hope that I can better illustrate the impacts that the lack of revenue has had and will continue to have on our organization and community if we don't find a solution. The city, of course, of Salem budgets on an annual basis, but obviously we think, in longer terms than that. Josh does a 5-year forecast that's obviously very helpful. And we've had our consulting team from Moss Adams verify that forecast is accurate. So I'm relying on that information to make decisions not just about this year, but about years to come. I'm going to, for those of you who are following along, I'm going to jump to the 4th page of this because I'm going to skip over all of the part about the revenues, and I'm going to land on the page that has why additional positions. And I'm going to talk about why we are proposing and including additional positions in this budget. So since 2008, the city of Salem has added more than 26,000 residents. That's the size of the city of Woodburn, for reference purposes. It'd be the 24th largest city in the state of Oregon. So, that's not an insignificant number of people to move into your community. And the city's general fund staffing, police, fire, libraries, parks, recreation, code enforcement, parks rangers, enterprise support, and the like, have remained largely unchanged for the past 15 years. You'll see that personnel reductions from 2009 to 2014 and continued increases in service demands have created significant staffing and organizational challenges. In 2008, the city's general fund staffing ratio was 5.14 positions per 1,000 of population. And in this current fiscal year, we are proposing 4.34 positions per 1,000 in the general fund. These staffing challenges are impacting our ability to provide sufficient and requested services to our community. For example, our fire department now responds to 85% more calls than they did in 2008 with the same level of staffing. Similarly, the call volume has increased during that time for the police department as well. And Chief Womack will speak to you later this evening, and we'll talk about the way that we've managed that increase in call volume and reduction in staffing over time. Further cuts to staffing would mean further eroding our internal and external customer service levels, our emergency and non-emergency response times, the services that we are able to offer to our community, and would further impact the quality of the employee experience as those left behind continue to do more with less. And I'm not sure if there was ever fat in the city's operations, but I can tell you conclusively today that there is not fat in our budget. The fat has long since been burned off, and we are a very lean organization. Moss Adams completed an internal services benchmarking study for us in the fall of 2022, and they presented that information to staff and city council at council's February 21st, 2023 work session. Moss Adams identified 8 peer cities in the western United States, and they found that nearly every service that they tested for, the city of Salem was understaffed with deficiencies ranged from 11 to 156% of our peer cities. Police and fire had separate independent studies, which, the chiefs will be talking about this evening, and both of those studies found that police and fire to be understaffed. And the additional positions included in the budget this year with our operations budget are intended to begin to close gaps in our staffing levels. So this is one of the reasons why I didn't propose cuts in staffing in this budget proposal. Cutting staff and reducing services has been how the city of Salem has balanced its budget for the last 15 years. This approach has resulted in marginal reductions in service year over year, literally a death by 1,000, reductions, if you will. The shortfall that we are anticipating is approaching 10% of our general fund. As many have pointed out, a 10% reduction is defined as a decimation. Thank you, Councilor Phillips, for that. I think that it is time to consider other options. So I asked our consultant team from Moss Adams for assistance in assessing the impacts of this magnitude of reduction would have on our programs and services offered by the city. Our organization would be unrecognizable, and I think our community would find such changes shocking and unacceptable. And I'm going to say more about that in a minute. Even with cuts, though, throughout the non-police and non-fire general fund programs, cuts that would go far beyond what most would find acceptable, there would still be impacts to core services, our police and fire departments. Opening a new fire station, for example, would not be possible without additional revenues. It simply is not possible without additional revenues. So when factoring in the total budget for each department and how peer cities have outsourced some functions, even some of the areas like information technology that appear to be adequately staffed, when you really drill into it, you discover that that's not the case, because many other communities outsource their IT functions, and if you compare both the outsourced and our internal staffing levels, then you quickly discover that yes, even our RT function is understaffed. So moving on to impacts. First impact is that our micro shelter village and the navigation center would have to close, at least in my opinion. They are the farthest removed from our core services, and that they would need to close without some sort of additional funding. We continue to lobby our legislative delegation, our governor. She has been at how many ribbon openings? Two of our ribbon cuttings here recently. She understands the magnitude of our problems and our challenges. If new funds are not forthcoming, we will be forced to develop a detailed plan to meet our budgetary limitations. We understand that. This plan will include reductions in services across the board for all general fund supported programs. As noted a moment ago, we've already started this work, and the city has done this work before through our performance-based budgeting exercises. We would use that work to guide our decision-making if cuts were necessary. I think it's important that we generally articulate what this means. If it would likely include reductions to our police officers, 15 to 20 police officers, perhaps 2 fire stations, closing the West Salem Library, reducing hours of operation at the main facility. It would mean reducing our long-range planning capacity, communications capacity, code enforcement, general government support, scaling back our municipal court operations, eliminating any general fund support for housing and homeless response, and reducing support for parks, maintenance, recreation programs, and support, and limiting other programs and services equaling approximately $19 million. And with reductions of this magnitude, which is, $19 million is 10% of our general fund budget, generally speaking, With reductions of this magnitude, it is impossible to avoid impacting all service areas, and it would be impossible for our community not to be negatively impacted by these cuts. So, wrapping this up, this level of reduction would be extraordinarily painful, and we will get into this more at Council, certainly on the 15th, when we have our workshop. We'll be talking more about the work that Moss Adams has done. But this is the only way for us to continue our operations and present a balanced budget without additional revenues. I anticipate that this is a necessary exercise, and I hope that it is not something that we will have to implement. I am confident that our community trusts the City of Salem to do the right thing. Today, the right thing is to increase our revenues, to continue to provide existing services, and to begin to meet our growing demands of our community. And now I'm going to ask Krishna Namburi to come forward and to talk to us about the employee impacts that would be experienced and also the impacts on our general enterprise services. So thank you, Krishna.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. Krishna Namburi, Deputy City Manager. Good evening, Madam Chair and committee members. I have been asked by the City Manager to speak to you today about the impact of enterprise-wide understaffing in the City of Salem, and also staffing issues with the internal services departments. As a city employee for the past 23 years, I have had the privilege of working with my colleagues and have been a witness going through many organizational changes. And over the years, these organizational changes resulted into consolidation of 11 departments to 7. So when I started with the city, we had 11 departments. Now we have 7. Restructuring of departments to improve efficiencies and save money. Demand for staff to do more with less. And chronic understaffing. That's kind of what has happened over the years. Now, when I talk to my colleagues, they express a love for what they do, but also they all share their feelings of being overworked and sense of disappointment that they're not able to do their jobs as effectively as they want to do. Now, this chronic understaffing resulted into several organizational challenges. We have been dealing with this over the years. Workload issues, of course, lack of backup positions for many departments and divisions. And this actually is leading into staff not able to take time off. And, we have many staff, their vacations are maxed out, but they just don't have, enough resources to be able to take their vacations. And of course, in several areas, we do have single point of failures. Now, we also lack a process for succession planning. And one of the things that happened with this several organizational changes, we have many of our employees do multiple jobs. And when these employees leave the organization, often it is not a one-to-one match to replace. And last week, I had the opportunity to participate in, I attended the Mental Health Support and Response Team Certification Training. It's still a mouthful, but so it was a 2-day training, like 4 hours. So it was kind of pretty intense. Like it was total of 8 hours. Chief Niblock and several of the SHA, Salem Housing Authority team, management team, also attended the training. And, that was a pretty impactful training. Honestly, I left Friday evening with a heavy heart because what I really, the message that I heard from the staff was, so there are several other staff from the other departments also participated in that. What I heard from the staff was Being overworked and understaffed is incredibly challenging. Kind of a common sense of disappointment that they're not able to do their jobs as effectively as they would like to. And the worry that they're not providing the level of service that the public deserves and the kind of impact they all hope to make. So that was, to me, the last one where everybody's worry is, hey, we need to provide more service to our community. And that was a pretty impactful message for me when I walked away from that. So when I look at these organizational challenges, conceptually, there are several solutions that we all are aware, providing that we could provide training and support for existing staff and sustaining a workplace culture that values the contributions of all of our employees and invest into technology and other tools that's supposed to help us with being more efficient. But when I'm kind of looking at it, is I always feel like we are in this vicious cycle, right? Like what that means is we need to invest into more services, and we need to invest into our internal services departments, right? Because those are the departments that could do these things. IT, HR, facilities, finance, legal, enterprise strategy, and employee development. These are the departments and the divisions. So these are all the internal services that are understaffed. And the ratio of internal staff to city staff is 1 to 8.33. This ratio is significantly higher than the average of our comparable cities. And here, the higher number is not a good news. The experience of internal services staff is similar to what we see with other departments. Understaffed, overworked, and that continuous struggle with work-life balance. And we all know this, internal services are the backbone of any organization. And when we need to be working towards a model where if we are adding staff, external department staff, we need to add resources to internal services. So the experience of being overworked and understaffed, that's not new to dedicated public servants or public employees. But unfortunately, as I kind of think about it every day, when you do this, especially for employees that have been here with the city for many years, and you do this day in and day out, and that's exhausting, and that is also challenging to keep up with the same spirit when you come to work, and I'm going to do more with less, and that gets exhausting. And so as I kind of work with the employees, and again, one of the best part of my job is I get to see many people, all of our employees, and I get to talk to them. So our employees are committed to do their work and passionate about serving the public. But we find ourselves struggling to keep up with the demands of our jobs. And the health of any organization, our organization, is dependent on the health and well-being of our employees. And I feel incredibly proud and fortunate that I get to work alongside 1,387 colleagues of mine who all share the same vision of making a positive difference for this community and in the lives of others. Thank you.
Krishna, I had a quick question for you. You said, I think, a very critical sentence in there, and I'm not sure, I know that counselors have heard this from you before, but I would love for you to elaborate now here at the Budget Committee, and that is the single point of failure. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have pretty much, I would say, many positions in the city where if somebody is taking a vacation, we just kind of keep our fingers crossed and we hope that nothing goes wrong because we don't have backup positions to fill that. And that has been, I think that's a story with many departments. And that concerns me a lot. And I know when internal services and external services. I think all departments deal with it. We did have, our consulting firm, Moss Adams, came and kind of talked about succession planning as the most critical thing that we should be looking into, especially with the way the job market is. But it was huge. Like the issue is, so we had to kind of work with them. So the Moss Adams said, okay, let's look at least like the top, whatever the positions, and we'll look into that succession planning. They did a great job of providing that, but there isn't any way to execute it, because that means we need more resources to execute it.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if it's okay, I'd like to call up Chief Niblock to provide some perspective on impacts from a fire department perspective.
You've probably never seen a fire chief do this before, but it will make sense at the end, if they'll stay there. All right, can you pull my slides up for me, Josh? Perfect. Well, good evening, Madam Chair, Budget Committee members. Before I start, I just want to give a shout out to Krishna and her team for that awesome mental health training last week. It was enlightening. I learned a lot about other parts of the organization and the struggles that they have with trying to deliver service. And it was cathartic to listen. It was a small group, I think 12 of us. So we got a real personal experience with the instructor. And I'm an old guy and have been to lots of trainings, and I was kind of like, well, do I want to take 8 hours and go to this? I'm glad I did. So I'm going to encourage my peers to seek that training out when it becomes available again, because it was worth the 8 hours of time to get to know some of your other employees. So with that, I'll jump in here real quick. City Manager Keith Daly asked me to talk about the impacts to the community and response times based on our staffing levels. And so I'm going to show you a couple maps. And these used to be called the red death maps because I had red squares on them where we didn't meet the response times. So I simplified it this year. I'm going to show you the map of the year that we met the standard the best we could. So we have a response standard here in Salem of 5.5 minute response from the time you call dispatch till the time we arrive. Try to hit that at the 85th percentile. In 2017, we met that response time 74.3% of the time, which is the highest we've ever met it. And from 2010 to 2017, we were pretty much in the 70s to 74%. So we were doing okay. We were 10% below what the council wanted us to do. This is a council adopted standard. And there's also a national standard, which is 5 minutes arrival from dispatch of call to arrival at the scene in 90% of the time. I'm going to show you a map that shows that. So this is 2017 with 74%, 74.3%. And the green squares, the quarter-mile green squares, are areas in town where we're able to meet that response time standard. All the rest of the areas, it was longer than 5.5 minutes. And that's important because if you have a heart attack or a stroke or you're bleeding to death, time matters. Every call that we go on that's a critical life-threatening emergency call, whether it's a fire or a medical emergency, that event is actually happening when they call us. It's not a report later. It's not an investigation. It is happening right now. So time matters. Seconds count. The faster we get there, the faster we can mitigate the situation, save the life, save the property, do all those things that we need to do. So this is this last year, 2022. Of course, we've had a pretty significant increase in our call volume, 85% growth from 2010 to 2022. You'll notice that there's a lot fewer green squares on this map than there was in the 2017 map. So this is 60.9% meeting the goal, a lot fewer green squares. So that's our standard, our 5.5 minute standard. This map I'm going to show you now troubles me greatly. This is what the national standard map looks like. 90 minutes, 90 seconds, 5 minute response time 90% of the time. That's how we meet the national standard. That's the reality. That's what we're measuring ourselves against, really. Our standard is artificially a little lower. We adopted it in the 90s. It's a great standard, but it's not it's not the gold standard. When we talk about staffing, we have 11 fire stations. We have 43 people on duty. We had 43 people on duty in 2010. We have 43 people on duty every day now. And our call volume has increased, as the city manager said, 85% in that same time period. In 2010, we ran 16,910 calls for service, and last year it was 31,319 calls. So now I'm going to talk about the balls that are up here, in case you're wondering about those. And I'm not Bill Nye the Science Guy, so this is just for visual recognition of the differences. So a golf ball at 1.68 inches in diameter, that baseball is about 85% bigger in diameter. So that's the call growth in 2010. This is the calls in 2022. And this softball is where we're headed in 2027. We're going up about 6.4% in our call volume each year. And we've got a chart here that shows 2011 through 2022. And I believe in 2016 or 2017, when I presented to council, I said, hey, these lines are going to switch. Our trend line is going to go the wrong direction. And that happened in 2018. Our call volume, this is the blue line. You can see it's really increasing pretty rapidly there. And our call percentages were pretty steady up to 2017. And then in 2018, they started to plummet. And that trend's going to continue. This next slide I'll show you is a 10-year forecast all the way out to 2032. The most concerning thing to me on this slide is last year, 5,313 people did not receive a 5.5-minute response when they experienced a critical life-threatening emergency in our community. 5,313 people did not receive a 5.5-minute response when they had a life-threatening emergency in our community because of our response time standard. And if you look forward to the end of that document, where it shows, I think we're running 56,000 calls a year in 2032. That's 15,000 people, based on if we have the same resources we have right now. So we are at a point where we need to add firefighters in fire station locations in this community. And if we wanted to meet the national standard, 90% 5-minute response time, we need 111 more firefighters and 9 more fire stations. That's what a community this size should have to adequately respond to the fire need in this community and the ambulance need in this community. We haven't added any since 2010. That's 12 years. No new people on the street. So our back's up against the wall here, and this is a critical decision point. It's great news the community passed the $300 million bond, and we've got some money in there to build some stations, but we have no money to staff that Station 12. So we're not going to build a station we can't staff. We tried that once and didn't work out so well. So that's what happened with Station 11 when we built it. So that's, I'm happy to answer any questions you have, but I think at the end of the day, I would just like to recognize the men and women of the department, how hard they work to try to keep these levels up. But they are simply being overwhelmed by the number of calls, and they're increasing. We're up 4% already this year in the first few months. So our call volume continues to increase. By the end of the year, it'll probably be around 6 or 7%. So we'll be adding a couple thousand calls a year.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
I know we have a couple of questions here, I'm sure. But I would just like to say that last point that you made, right, that is when a budget starts to influence people's lives. This is where it's a life or death situation, and a budget matters. It's always very shocking to hear. Member Curtis, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I just have a question about the call volume increase. Do you know why? I mean, is it just population, or do you do an analysis of the types of calls? Is it medical emergencies? Is it fires? Is it people downtown? What is it?
Great question, and a very common question. So we've done a lot of analysis. There is not a single factor. I'd say the biggest single factor is population growth. So if you have 26,000 more people in your community, they're going to have needs. They're going to have to call services. There's more cars on the road. There's more people walking and riding their bikes and living life, basically, and accidents happen. So most of our calls are medical in nature. Our fire calls are up as well in percentage, but most of it's medically related. We have an aging community. And I often get, well, is it the homeless issue? Yes, we respond a lot to homeless issues. They're out in the elements, they're exposed. Some of them have mental health issues, some of them have drug addiction issues. I'm not generalizing, not everybody has that, but it's hard to live out in the elements. And so they have medical conditions too that we respond to them like we respond to anybody else. They're a patient, and we take them to the hospital like anybody else. But it's a combination of all those things, and we're an aging population as well. So as people age, they have more medical needs, and they have more need to call 911 for services. And so I think that's what we're seeing. I think the other thing that's concerning to me is we have a projection that we're going to see 60,000 more people in population in this community in the next 15 to 20 years. That is going to explode the calls for emergency services, just like the last 26,000 did. So if we grow that much, we're going to see more desire and more need to be able to serve the community. And quite frankly, at the national standard that I talked about earlier, we meet that standard about 51% of the time. That's an F. That's an F grade. So that's not, I can tell you, none of the men and women that work for the department want to meet that level. They want to get there faster. They want to save the life. They want to conserve the property, and they're really driven to do that. But it's tough to do when you're running 20 calls a day in a 24-hour period. You're just going, and you never stop.
Thank you, Chief. Any other questions? Go ahead.
You sure? Thanks, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
So, Chief, I have a question. I'll kind of get to it in a moment, but I do like you bringing in your prop, so that was good. I'm a visual learner. So, going back to the number of calls, you said it was 5,313 that did not receive a visit or a response under 5.5 minutes. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So 5,000 people, and I think the city manager said 26,000 people have come in since 2008. Is that it? 26,000?
Yes, sir.
And there's been no increase when it comes to firefighters, correct? Mm-hmm. So I think last week there was a question, and it involved overtime for the police. I think Member Cohen asked that question. When it comes to firefighters, what impact does that have on your budget when you have firefighters who may be tired, but there's no one to replace them and they got to work overtime? Can you talk to us about that impact and what it does to, their physicality, their mental alertness, their family? Can you share that with us, please?
Certainly. Firefighters are a tactical athlete. So they have to be peak physical condition. They have to jump up out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, go to a house fire, go to a commercial fire, go to a heart attack, deal with a gunshot victim, all kinds of things. So at any time of the day, we're open 24 hours a day, 365. We're staffed 43 people every day. So there are days when we have to mandatory people to work another shift. So they may have just worked a 24-hour shift, and we say we try to offer that to off shifts so they have a day off. But if we can't, we mandatory them to be there. So we don't close fire stations. We keep them open. So sometimes people have to work a 24, sometimes they have to work a 48, sometimes they have to work a 72, sometimes they work a 96, which is 4 days in a row. We don't like doing that, but we got to serve the community. Now, what that does to a person is it messes with your work-life balance. I was on the line for 17 years, and I can tell you that I never slept really good at the fire station when I got to lay down to go to sleep. I slept with one eye open, listening for the call to come in, and there's that cortisol dump when the call comes in, because it's just normal. That's how your body works when you hear the bell go off. So it does add some stress. It can cause sleep disorders. There's all kinds of things that firefighters are predisposed to because of the nature of the job. We do things to try to accommodate for those things. We've just recently changed our tone outs in our station. Instead of a loud gong that goes off, it's a slowly articulating sound. It doesn't delay the response, but it's a little less stressful to hear that than hear a super loud bell. So it does have some impacts. We're trying to be mindful of that. as we manage the level of staffing and those types of things. But since 2020, it's been tough. We've had a lot of mandatory overtime to get positions filled. We've also had to staff an extra ambulance this last year to help out our private provider. So that's people that get called in to do that as well. So it does add up. And we're down numbers too. We're down about 15, I think, right now, and we'll be down 20 people by December. So we're doing some recruitment right now to try to get some of those positions filled. But the more people you're down, the people that are left have to work more.
So with that 15 that we already are down, come December, we're down by 20. Is that 15, are those people that retired, moved away, different job or something?
Combination of all, so largely retirements, probably 12 or 13 of them were normal retirements. We're having trouble recruiting nationwide. We're having trouble recruiting paramedics. Everybody is. It's tough right now. And so our normal recruitment would be 10 or 12 people. We got 4 last time. So there's 8 positions that we didn't get a fill. So it's retirements from last year, retirements from this year. We did have several people during the pandemic decide this is not what I want to do for a living. I'm going to sell my house. I'm going to cash out my retirement. I'm going to load up my family up in the motorhome, and I'm going to go to Florida. So we had a few of those. They evaluate, where I'm at, what I'm doing, what I want to do for a living, and they decided they want to do something else. We've had a few leave our department for greener pastures, if you will, a little more money, a little different benefits. Now we do have a TA that's going to be coming in front of council here next month for the firefighters local that we believe will right some of those conditions and put us in a better position to recruit people. But I've been here since 2004. I've never been down 20 people. So usually we're 1 or 2 overhired, and that helps us achieve a balance in our overtime because we're fully staffed. When you're not fully staffed, you spend more overtime to staff yourself.
Thanks, G. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Yes, Member Julie Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of questions. The 5,013 number of not meeting the national standard, of those calls, not to be weird, but did everybody die? Or was
we don't track how many people die from that. I can tell you this. I've had to call 911 a couple of times. My wife broke her arm and she passed out and she stopped breathing for like 45 seconds. And as we were trying to revive her, we called 911. It took them 3 minutes to get there. That seemed like an eternity when a loved one's not breathing or something bad's happening like that. So that worked out that time. There are people that die every day in this town. You can go look at the list on the morgue to see how many people pass away, and there's more than you would think. We know that if it's a viable patient, if we get there before 5.5 minutes, and after 5.5 minutes, less and less viable as time goes on. So if it's an 8-minute response, you're probably not going to the hospital if you're having a heart attack. You're probably going to the morgue. So, and that's pretty blunt, but we don't transport deceased people to the hospital. So we'll work the code right on scene. We'll call the code on scene. If they're not survivable or not a viable patient, they don't go to the hospital. So, and we don't track how many people of that 5,300 don't make it. But I can tell you, if we get into the area where we're doing 15,000, there'll be more people die than there would at 5,000.
Thank you for that. Also, how many, I had heard you mention at another meeting, the percentage of calls that go to senior living, is there a high population need there?
So as we age, we use the 911 system more. They're more prone to falls and injuries and health conditions, just as a course of aging. When you have a community of people that age in care centers, we go there more than we would go to a single residence of somebody who was 35, for example, or had young kids. We do go to those addresses, but not as frequently as we go to some of the others. So when we talk about the increased call volume, the more assisted living centers that we add in the community, those are typically, they're a call per bed per year. So if they put 500 beds in, you're going to have 500 calls there in a year for the station that's next to that facility. So you put 1,000 beds in somewhere, that's going to take up 1,000 calls of that unit. And we like to have our engine companies at the 2,000 call level, 2,500 call level is where they're most reliable in the community, so they can handle the calls that come into their system. We have engines that are running 4,500 calls a year. So way above that.
Thank you for that. The other point that Mayor Hoy has brought up several times is that so many state buildings that we are responding to without financial support in that way. So is that a number you've given, like what percentage of calls or?
Yes, it's, we average about 300 to 400 calls a year to the state facilities. So it's about 30,000 calls, about 1%, a little more than 1% of our calls to those facilities every year.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, to Member Curtis's point, I'm just wondering if there is data on the number of emotionally disturbed persons that you need to respond to in a year.
So we have tried to do some data crunching for some requests that have been made by council about how many EDP calls that we go. That covers a broad category of, and it's just an acronym for dispatch, excited delirium protocol is the official title to it, but we call them EDP calls, and there's a criteria for those. They cover a broad spectrum. So some of them require a police response, some of them require just fire, but we don't, I guess, drill down. We don't have the ability to drill out and say, how many is that? We can tell you how many EDP calls we had, but it covers a broad spectrum.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we have two people with their hands up, and then I think we're going to move on. We will have a chance. I see more people too. We will have a chance to talk with you again when you present your.
I'm not leaving. I'll be here.
Okay. So for those of you who also have questions, we'll loop back with the chief in a few. So we'll start with Member Phillips, we'll end with Member Nordyke, and then I think we're going to hear from Chief Womack as well.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief, for being here. This at the risk of being politically incorrect, this is just my anecdotal experience, being an emergency room doctor who's practiced here for 15 years and paying attention to national trends. But I think everywhere, and true here in Salem, is we're starting to experience what we've in our field called the silver tsunami. So, it's not just, increase in population, it's an increase in severity of diseases and complexity of disease. So I can't emphasize enough. I mean, my question to you, one of them would be, what question could I ask you to drive home, the reality of that 85% increase in call volume? I know it's been hard on the front line of the emergency room. It seems like the medics are worked incredibly hard. Fires worked incredibly hard. How are people feeling in terms of burnout? How are things going?
So I appreciate that question. I would say since the pandemic, that's the last 3 years of the real crush of the increase in the call volumes. We had a downturn during the pandemic, and then we went up 5,000 calls in a year. So that was like a 180 turn in our direction. It's been incredibly difficult on the staff. The men and women that serve every day, they have been troopers. They didn't work from home during the pandemic. They came to work every day. They wore masks and Gumby suits and gloves and gowns, and they did shot clinics at the state fairgrounds with the hospital. So it was like all hands on deck for, we had the EOC open for 17 months. It's been exhausting. I don't know what else to say. I think if you ask people now, they have a servant's heart, and they're here to serve the public, and that's the focus we've really tried to push in the organization, and they've adopted that. But at the end of the day, when you work a 96-hour shift or you work a 120, all you want to do is go home and hug your kids or take a nap, and then come back and do it the next day. So it's been pretty grueling. We do have a very functional peer fitness team. So we're focused on diet and exercise and trying to keep people engaged as much as we can. Try to support the folks where we can. It's been a grinder. I won't. Probably the most difficult couple of years of my 38-year career is this last couple of years. So, and on top of that, we're down staff. So that means the rest of us are working harder to continue what we're doing. We're dedicated to do that. We're going to work our butts off to try to meet that response time the best we can. At the end of the day, there's just not enough of us to go around. And so that's been a real challenge. But I think positive mindset, There's some days that are a little harder than others. But for the most part, I think people have a good attitude, and they've continued to show up to work. And we're trying to be supportive as we can on the management side to make sure that we're meeting their needs and taking care of them.
Thank you for that. I have a couple follow-ups. One, just thank you for your leadership and your department. Thank them for the hard work they do every day. It's greatly appreciated. I've heard Vice Chair Brown mentioned the fact that we're currently have 15 openings and may have as many as 20 or more by the end of the year. It's been proposed, in testimony provided to this body that we should consider having employees contribute to their own retirement. Do you think that would impact your ability to recruit?
Yes, absolutely. I think right now the playing field out there in the recruitment arena is employees have choices because there's so few of them out there to hire. They aren't going to consider an employer that is taking shortcuts on what everybody else is taking care of. So while it might seem like there's a little bit of savings there and you could hire another person, I don't know that you're going to be able to hire that person because they're probably going to go to another organization.
Thank you. And then my final comment would just be, the severity of the issue of getting there in a timely fashion. I mean, there's going to be a lot of cases where, people have a few hours or a few days, but there are those cases where seconds matter. Within this year, I won't go into specifics, but I had a case where, the first responders were just, 2 to 3 minutes away, and they got there, did high quality CPR, and the patient was starting to wake up by the time they got back to the emergency room. And by the time I did my, first hour of care, they were basically back to their baseline. And without that high quality CPR in that short period of time, I don't think they'd be alive.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you for your staff being there in time to make that difference.
Thank you. Member Nordyke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief, for everything that you do and your entire team does. Full stop. A couple questions. So I was just looking at the U.S. Census data, and it shows that for Salem, Oregon, 21.6% of our population has a language other than English spoken at home. I'm just wondering, what is your team doing to address the fact that we have more and more languages, and how do you handle that when you're providing emergency care?
So a couple of ways. We offer language classes for our folks if they want to learn Spanish or whatever language they want to learn. We have computer learning for that, and then we also pay an incentive, a language incentive, if they come in there already bilingual. So we have quite a few of our employees who are bilingual in several different languages, so they're more than bilingual. And then we have several that do ASL as well, so for sign language. So if we know we're going to an event where sign language is a big deal, then we try to send those employees to that, and that's always a big hit when we speak their language. Same thing with Spanish or any other language that we have. And then we have translation services that we can use as well with our electronic devices. We can hook to the internet and actually translate on the pads that we carry, the electronic devices. So we can, it's slow and clunky, but we can get the keywords across to help bridge that barrier. Oftentimes we use young adults in the home that are bilingual if their parents don't speak English, and so that helps sometimes, but that's always a little sketchy sometimes because you don't, if the translation's happening or whatever, sometimes you don't want to tell the children what's going on with the parents. So, but that's what we have right now in place for that.
Great, thank you. The other question, and it wasn't apparent to me from our census data, is what our median age is in Salem. Do you know if our median age has gotten older or younger over the last 10 or so years?
Well, I know I'm older.
Same here.
Exponentially the last few years. But I'm 58, but I look 70. No, I don't know what our median age is. I know that we have. It seems that we have had a lot of development for retirement homes. I think that's the boom industry right now, is because people are aging and they're looking for places to live other than a single residence, and so they're looking at those homes. So it seems like there's more of those now than there has been in the last 10 years, but I don't know how that equates to the median age.
Right. Thank you. The final question I had is our mayor has done a great job pointing out the fact that our state agencies use a lot of your emergency services. Can you just highlight that for us?
So we respond to all the state buildings, state capitol, pretty much anybody who calls 911 in Salem. And I think 30% of the buildings in town are off the tax rolls between state and schools and churches. So we go to all those. And it's whether it's a fire alarm or a heart attack or somebody's passed out or a diabetic issue or whatever. So like I said, I think it's 386 last year, so the average is right around 400 times a year. We go to those locations, state locations. If you throw churches and schools in there, it's probably triple that for those responses. So yeah, that's about the number that we run to those places.
Did I hear you say about 400 calls for service per year to state entities?
To the state entity buildings,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank
I think
you.
it was 386 last year.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I have actually asked for that before, and I think I have the information at home, but maybe staff can get us the medium age and kind of what direction and how things are changing.
Definitely.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Thank you, Chief. I'm sure we'll have more questions for you later.
Thank you very much.
No, Chief Womack, thank you.
This one already ready for next, Josh? There we go. What's that? No props from me, sorry. Yes, Mike? Good evening. Trevor Womack, Chief of Police here. So I've been looking forward to this for a while for our opportunity to speak about our budget. But the city manager asked me to also cover similarly kind of the impacts and especially how we've managed as a police department over the past 10, 12, 15 years of status quo budget, no growth, while our service demands and population has increased along the way. And so I'm going to reemphasize again kind of this theme of that death by 1,000 cuts, because that's what this has been like when you're facing increasing call load and service demands with no additional staff. Necessarily what happens is you chip away and take little bites at your services and then make adjustments along the way. And a lot of times that's not felt much by the community. So for some, this may feel like a new crisis that we're hearing about for the first time. But for all of us in this room, the staffers, this has been in 10 years or more in the making. Like, this is nothing new for us. And so the cuts and the adjustments have been happening for a long time. The difference now is that this is an acute point, right? Any further cuts that we're going to have to make as a police department are going to be felt by the community. They're going to be damaging to public safety, and they're going to be damaging for our police officers and staff as well. So I just want to emphasize that point, that it seems new when we're talking about some of this, but this is a crisis in the making. And the only thing that's carried us through over the past few years fiscally actually has been our federal dollars, one-time dollars that have come into the system. Those are no longer there. So they kind of prolonged the inevitable, but now we're at that point. And so policing, we've continued to make those little cuts and adjustments over the years, and I want to just overview what that need is. We've heard, maybe you've heard the need for 60 police officers. These numbers are thrown around. I want to talk a little bit about that need and why it's legitimate, justify that a little bit or explain that. And so to go back to 2020, right before I became the police chief here actually, the City Council commissioned a community engagement assessment or a community policing audit of the police department to see how we're doing with our community engagement with our community. So that was done, and there was a whole list of great recommendations and findings that came out of that audit. A lot of community input went into that, and so in short, what the community told us, they want more community policing. They want more community engagement with their police department. That's the type of policing that this community wants and deserves. So there was a list of recommendations and findings on how we should do that. We took all those recommendations and we worked them into a strategic plan so we could kind of chart a course of how to get there. But what's very notable about that report, there was kind of a giant asterisk at the end that said, by the way, you don't have enough staffing to do this. So we wanted to understand that better. So we commissioned another independent analysis, an independent staffing analysis by an outside firm. Took a look at our workload, and our population and our needs and our service demands. And long story short, they recommended a need of 27 to 83 more police officers just for our patrol division. We have 3 divisions, but just for our patrol division, this range of at least 27 officers up to 83. Our own internal estimates in there landed us at about 60 for that need, so that's where that number comes from. It's based off of that independent analysis and that community engagement study. You also had me, a law enforcement professional with over 30 years of experience that came from a different state, a larger agency, larger city, a city that went through municipal bankruptcy, by the way. So I've got some experience in this area. Came in from the outside with my fresh eyes and assessed the organization also. And my findings are similar. I think the need for 60 officers is legitimate, it's credible, and we're at an acute point right now after this decades-long process that we've been through. So the need is real and it's there. No, for us, the status quo budget's no longer going to work for us. We're not trimming fat anymore, or we're cutting into muscle and we're hitting bone. So it's real. Some of those continual service adjustments that I've been talking about that have been happening for over a decade, I want to give just a few current examples to show that we're still doing this, constantly trying to find efficiency measures, and I'm not even following along in my PowerPoint. Let me catch up here. There's not much detail you'll see in here anyway, because what I'm touching on is information that you already have in your agenda packets. That's why I'm talking very broadly here, because the details are in your agenda pockets, and of course we'll have time for questions too. But when we're talking about these continued adjustments and efficiency measures, just for some recent examples, just within the past couple years, we adjusted our in-person police response to things like noise violations, these low-level non-emergency things that we used to go to, barking dog calls, pure, simple noise complaints. We can't respond to those with our police officers anymore. We came up with some alternatives like online reporting and some other things we can do, but we're having to constantly review what calls we go to and pull back because of the staffing challenges. That's one small example. A more meaningful example, I would say, was when you have to eliminate or shut down entire units of your police department. So go back about 5 years ago, we had a public relations unit at the Salem Police Department. You talk about community engagement and community involvement, we had a public relations unit that comprised a police sergeant, 5 police officers, and a support staff person. When I arrived, it was down to 2 people. Quickly, it went down to 1, and I ultimately eliminated that unit because we had to continually pull over the years away from that unit to maintain our core services, our emergency response on patrol. That's that death by 10,000 cuts. That's a good example of that. The same thing is happening right now with our team that you're probably all familiar with. You've seen them riding bicycles around downtown. They used to be dedicated to the downtown core. They'd be very responsive to our downtown business needs, helping people feel safe when they came shopping downtown. That team has been spread so thin now with other additional duties across the whole city, not just downtown. They're no longer dedicated just downtown. And if we stay on this pace, they will go away. They will be absorbed into this patrol emergency response, just like public relations unit was. So those are just 2 real practical examples of how this is playing out. Whereas the community might not feel all those things that are happening, but they're real and they're happening, and they're getting bigger and more impactful as we go, the longer we go with this. Some of the efficiency measures I'd like to just touch on, and when I talk about the community engagement assessment and the independent staffing analysis, those are available on our transparency portal on the webpage, so anybody can take a look at those. So I don't want to go into too much detail, you can look yourselves. But some of the efficiency measures in the independent staffing analysis, they didn't just say you need 27 to 83 more police officers. They said, oh, by the way, here's some additional things you should try to do for efficiency. And so we're taking those very seriously. I like to think about this as the proverbial, we want to make sure we're squeezing every last drop of blood out of this turnip that we call Salem PD, right? Before I can come and say we need more resources, I better make sure, and we better make sure that we're being as efficient and effective as possible. These are not easy things, though. These are difficult things to implement. Right now, as we speak, we implemented a 12-hour shift structure for our patrol officers. They used to work on 10-hour shifts. For this year, this calendar year, we implemented a 12-hour shift structure, so we're about 4 months into it now. And can you imagine what happens now when you're working 12-hour days, and it's emergency services that are understaffed, and so they're often held over 13 hours, 14 hours for a day. They either have a 3-day week or a 4-day week, so you can imagine working 12 to 14-hour days as a police officer. And so it begins to have impacts. And what the concerns for me are, obviously, that work-life balance. How's that affecting them, their ability to spend time with their families and enjoy the time off? And then also officer safety issues there. At some point, you worry about fatigue and decision-making abilities. You also worry about your ability to interact positively with your community members that you're serving. But this is an efficiency measure on paper that will result in about a 23% efficiency as far as our patrol officers. So we're doing that this year. We also created 2 community service officer positions, full-time community service officers. These are non-sworn positions that can respond in the field, answer low-level non-emergency calls so that police officers can handle more serious incidents. They're not funded. We did this through salary savings. If we don't identify some additional revenue to support those positions, they're going to go away within 12 to 18 months. Also, multiple personnel transfers. We continually steal from specialized units to staff our patrol. One recent example is there's no more auto theft detective here in our city. We had to cut that position to put that person on patrol. So these little things are happening continually in the background, these efficiency measures and adjustments that maybe everyone doesn't see or feel, but they're real. Finally, I just wanted to mention, of course, and recognize that we are, like our fire department brothers and sisters, experiencing hiring challenges and recruitment challenges. But guess what? I think many people in this room are familiar with that too. It's not just our industry. There's a lot of industries experiencing this problem. But for policing specifically, this is not unique to Salem. It's across the country. And what we're experiencing is the combination of two factors at the same time. We're increased attrition. More people are leaving this profession, whether it's retirement or otherwise. And what's different for me after 30 years, we're seeing actual officers 7, 8, 10 years into a career and saying, you know what, this just isn't even for me anymore. I'm leaving. Like, that's unusual. That's never happened before in my career. We're seeing that now. People just leaving the profession. And at the same time, while that's happening, interest in this career has dropped dramatically. So fewer applications, more attrition, fewer applications. When those two things combine, you get yourself in a hole very fast. Today we had 22 or 23 sworn vacancies, some non-sworn vacancies also. But this is a temporary problem, rest assured. This is a temporary problem. We have a plan in place to try to double our hiring rate. We're increasing our recruiting efforts. We want to make sure we hire. There's opportunities here too. With every threat, there's a challenge. We want to make sure we replenish our ranks with a highly qualified, diverse workforce, and that's what we're going after. So we'll come out of this stronger and better, but it is temporary. Our projections about 3 years out from now show that our average, our officers at age of retirement are going to drop dramatically, and so we'll be catching up again. We'll go through this 2 or 3 year challenging period. We'll meet that challenge, and then we'll come out stronger and better. So for me, it's also a period of great opportunity for our department. I want to mention that because sometimes when there's vacancies, people will talk about salary savings and what we might do with those budgeted but unfilled positions. We have to separate that out. We don't want to reclassify those or lose those positions from the police department budget, because when we do gain ground again, we're out those positions, right? And we have to fight to get them back. We want to just stay focused on, we need to add more budgeted positions, not divert or lose budgeted positions. What it does, though, when you have vacancies is you do have salary savings, which is one-time short-term money that you can use in other ways, like the 2 CSO positions that we created. If we can't fund those, they'll roll back. They're funded through salary savings right now. So just kind of separate the issue between how we use salary savings and what we can do with unfilled vacancies. So again, I want to reemphasize this idea of this death by 1,000 cuts theme. It's real for us. It's becoming more and more painful the longer we're in this. The need there is real for those 60 police officer positions. And where we are today is we're talking about trying to cover funding gaps just to keep the resources we have today, much less add 60 police officers or more firefighters. And we are, rest assured, continually making adjustments and trying to find new efficiency measures to make sure we're good stewards of the city dollars. So with that, happy to take any questions also. Oops, I'll go back here. I want to preview that.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So Chief, again, I'm going to say this, and people will probably get tired of me saying it. 26,000 people are here since 2008, right? 26,000. I keep looking at you, make sure that number hasn't changed in 10 minutes. So 26,000 people, and we're still where we were when it comes to your staff. What would you cut to fund those positions?
What would I cut to fund positions? I don't want to cut anything.
I know you don't want to cut anything.
What will happen is we will continue to collapse specialized units to our core function, which is basically 911 call response, right? We have to make sure we can respond to emergencies 24/7, 365. So there's a unit right now, the community action unit that I was talking about, the downtown bicycle officers that are being spread thin. That's a non-essential function when it comes to 911 call response. Trust me, that would be very painful and bad for our community for that to happen, but that's what would happen. That those officers would be rolled back into patrol. Then we would start chipping into our investigative units. So obviously we have to investigate violent crimes and homicides and shootings. Of course we do. Everything below that, you start pulling away from that because you have to maintain those violent crime response investigations. And then of course you have to respond to vehicular issues within our city. We only have 8 traffic officers right now for a city of our size, woefully too small. They spend the vast majority of their time just investigating major collisions. They don't have time to go out and do proactive enforcement or education. They're just investigating crashes, which is a downward cycle. The more you do that, the less time you spend on other stuff, there's more crashes. So we have to pull back from that too. Ultimately, you constrict until you get back to the core service of 911 call response. I came from a city that went through bankruptcy. I've been through this before. We cut 25% of our police staffing, and it eliminated all forms of community engagement, non-necessary functions, and went nothing but patrol emergency response. It's dramatic impacts on the community. Violent crime went through the roof immediately. It didn't take 3-4 years, immediately. 2 record-breaking years of homicides occurred after those cuts. And so it's when I talk about this, it's a bit emotional for me because I've been through it. And so we want to stay ahead of that. We want to avoid that. I'm continually impressed with, since I've been here, the workload that these officers carry. What we've been going through recently with increased assaults on officers, not just the number of assaults on officers, but the intensity of these assaults on officers is horrible. Just someone randomly shooting at our officers just earlier this week. And so to think of them working 12 to 14 hours a day with that threat in mind continually, there's a target on your back constantly when you're in that car. And then to have the workload increasing and not seeing relief coming in the future as far as growth, it gets very, very challenging for our officers as well.
And I do want to say, just for the record, this is a conversation, that you and I have had outside of this place, and talking with several of your police officers, knowing what they go through when it comes to that work and life balance. So I do want to say I appreciate, the service that you and your team does, especially for the fire department also. And I think there's value. I think there's value in sharing our story, similar like we talked about last week. I think one of my concerns is if things are, from your perspective, are not getting better, getting worse, I'm a little bit worried that we're going to see worse before it gets better. And that's very frightening. And I say that as a person of color, because now there's another layer that's attached to it, right? Because at the end of the day, we want every person to feel like they can make a phone call and someone can show up.
That's right.
But a lot of people want someone to show up even after we've cut their funding. You can't have it both ways, right?
That's right.
And so that's the place where I think we have to continue to share and tell our story to all of the citizens, because you can't have it both ways. And I think sometimes people believe that they can have it both ways. So anyway, thank you for sharing. We appreciate all the service that you do.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Member Cohen.
Thank you, Chief. All right, I'm going to couch this in a couple different ways so that I'll just lay it out there. I've served 5 years in the military, so I understand the target on the back. I've had to have the conversation with Mom that Officer Cohen could get killed in line of duty undersea. I've also had to do mandatory deployments in which, you know what, you don't get to see people and you're stuck with 3 hour, and that's your sleep, 3 hours. Get over it. It's tough. I've lived here since '99, and I either was young and naive, which is probably true, but I also think that there has been an noticeable uptick in crime. For me personally, within the last 6 months, I've had to file 2 police reports that I'd never filed before. Someone graffitied my fence, and someone stole a $1,200 brand new utility trailer off of my property. Both of them were kind of disgruntling to me. So I get it. I understand where we're at. I live by the South Commercial Walmart, where there was a police-involved shooting. My neighbor is a paramedic, and my other neighbor is an ER nurse. So I get to see and hear the stories all the time. So there's that. The other part of me is, and the reason why I left, because, my first captain had, 4 marriages, right? It's a tough line of duty. A number one cause for police officers is not being shot, it's heart attacks, right? Through all the stress that they have to go through. My brother is a police officer, so this means a lot to me. Now, the point of what I'm getting at is I'm also the lead budget analyst for the Oregon Health Authority's Public Health Division. And we have certain rules that we have to apply by. The Legislative Fiscal Office and the Chief Financial Office for the state mandate that if you have a vacancy within your agency, you have to have a justifiable reason why it is vacant or it's taken from you. And it's hard, it's tough. There are some positions that we wish we couldn't lose in the Public Health Division because we just came out of public health emergency, right? Having people vacant as a budget analyst and budgeting for them doesn't make sense. And I'll just say that, right? If we're budgeting 20 people to not sit in their seats, that doesn't make sense to me. And so I saw your projections. You want to hire 24 people. You're also projecting to lose 12 people. So it leaves a balance of about 10 or so folks that'll still be vacant. A question that I'll have that, I mean, in the end of the day, you are the elected leaders here. I am just a volunteer. It'll be incumbent upon you to make the decision, but I ask you to think critically about why you would want to budget a vacant position. When you're budgeting that, you're essentially saying we're going to spend this money for someone to not sit in a seat and do a job. And I'll have the same issue about the additions on page 45 of our insert. We are budgeting 19 people that won't take effect until fiscal year 25. That doesn't make sense to me as a budget analyst in the state, and I've been doing this for 5 years. And I know that if my legislative fiscal overlords were over me, that'd be the first thing that they would take. So it isn't just I'm upset at police, I'm upset at fire. This is the standard that is done for all state agencies, whether you're a Department of Fish and Wildlife, whether you're the Oregon Health Authority, whether you're the Commission for the Blind. And by the way, when COVID first started, I was the budget analyst for the Commission of the Blind, and I had to have a serious talk about cutting 5 positions that help local blind residents here in Salem because everyone was going through a budget cut. It's not fun. In fact, it's horrible. But that's the decision we have to do as budget analysts. And so I thank you for all that you've done. And I know this has kind of been a spiel. But in the end, I think we need to be careful about budgeting for people not to be there on the job. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like we have Member Phillips has a question.
Thank you, Chair. And again, thank you, Chief, for being here and presenting tonight. I mean, I guess as a member of council, I have a series of questions, but I'll just start with one I wasn't expecting based on Members Cohen's comments. Is it our intention to keep those unbudgeted or unfilled? That's not what I thought it was for. Could you help me understand that? Like those vacancies.
Our intention is to fill every vacancy. Whether we'll be able to accomplish that or not, we'll see. But our intention is obviously to fill every vacancy. Yes.
Absolutely. So thank you, Chief, for that. Just a quick recap. Last year, City Council, after the budget committee met, decided, it was my motion, to add 6 new police officers in addition to the 2 new sworn officers that are part of the homeless response. So we added 8 budgeted positions last year, and it was my understanding that it's important to communicate that and build that into our budget moving forward so that you can do what you need to do to recruit those positions. What I've learned from that experience is that we didn't include any support staff. So how much of an impact do you think that had on recruiting? Could you potentially recruited more people if we'd budgeted some support staff?
I think Christian Embury touched a little bit on this. When we think about the need for support staff with any additions of operational staff, I think that's key within the police department itself also. So we have about a 1-to-5 ratio right now internally. So any model that I develop or request is going to include trying to maintain that ratio. So for every 5 sworn officers, you would want to add at least 1 support staff member. So as new revenue is eventually identified, if that's the case, then that's how we would build out that model. We would want to grow appropriately with the right amount of support staff also.
Thank you. And then another question about recruiting in this time where it's challenging to do so, not just here in Salem, but nationwide, in your department and in many fields of the workforce. It's been mentioned by testimony that employees should contribute to their own retirement. Would that have an impact on your ability to recruit?
Yes, that and everything we're doing has an impact. Moving to 12-hour shifts has an impact on recruiting. It's putting pressure on existing staff because there's so many opportunities out there. It's very easy to find another police officer position right now within driving distance of Salem with much less workload and better resource departments. And so we need to remain highly competitive in this marketplace if we're going to not just tread water, but gain ground.
And right now, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. It's my understanding that if we were to achieve our goals and hire as many people we're trying to budget for, that we're actually adding about 12 new positions. When you account for the people that are going to retire or move on, and then subtract out or add in the new people coming in. So we're going to grow an additional 10 to 12 at least. And is that within your strategic plan in terms of growing and increasing our community policing model?
That's right. I'm not sure if I'm tracking the extra 10 or 12 positions when we're talking about this current fiscal year. Yeah. But the vacancies we fill and any additional positions, you're correct, Counselor. The council took a good step forward within the past 2 fiscal years. Actually 9 sworn positions in total, 1 the first year, then 7 or 8 more after that. And so we haven't filled all those positions yet, but they have been added to the budget. So we're taking a step in the right direction towards the 60. What the vision is for the use of those additional positions is to expand a community policing model within this city. We've already redistricted our policing districts. We went from 11 policing districts down to 6 with the idea of creating this more geography-based community policing model for our city. Now we need to flesh that model out with bodies. So if you can imagine a team like I've described, our downtown officers on bikes, that sort of proactive problem-solving community engagement team, if we could replicate that in each of our 6 patrol districts, that would greatly expand that community engagement and community policing model that was recommended in that original assessment that we received.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And just to clarify, over the past couple of years, we've added 8, and you have hired more than 8 people in the last 2 years.
Yes.
But the reason why we aren't catching up is because we are losing more people than we are hiring.
That's right.
So
and last year, so it's all relative because our average hiring rate is 12 sworn per year. Last year we hired 15. So in that sense, we did above average. The circumstance we're facing is that across the nation, more people are leaving this profession and less people are interested. So that's a temporary problem. We are doing a good job at hiring even in that environment. We hired 3 more than we average would a year last year. So now we're trying to double that for this year and hire upwards 20 plus.
Thank you. I want to make sure the community knows that we are doing really good work on recruiting and hiring folks. It's just we're kind of sliding.
That's right.
And
Yes.
we need to keep going. Yes, Member Hoy.
Thank you. Chief, can you tell me how many, maybe a percentage of your calls are emotionally disturbed persons in crisis, or that's my first question.
I don't have an exact number off the top of my head, and then with our partners at Fire, they run the dispatch center, so sometimes they have really quick, better access to the calls for service data. But anecdotally, we don't also, when you think of EDP, like the fire chief described, it's such a broad range of calls. It really is. It could be a troubled youth that's throwing a tantrum in a bedroom, to someone unsheltered person on the street that's having a crisis. And so there's just this spectrum of things. Sometimes there's threats of violence involved, sometimes not. Indoors versus outdoors. So it really is a broad spectrum under this EDP bucket of calls.
Okay.
So it's hard to sort through that and try to say what's what. And then we don't, this ties a lot of times into a conversation around our unsheltered population. And being unsheltered is not a crime. And so what police departments are good at is tracking crime statistics, right? And so we've got all kinds of data about types of crime and what's happening. But as far as how much of that is connected to our unsheltered population, it's so hard to quantify because that's not a crime. So it's not a statistic that we routinely capture and track. And some would say we probably shouldn't.
Thank you for that. In addition, I was wondering about trespass calls, because I know I make several a week.
Yes.
But not to you, to Marion County, so that's good news.
We receive our share too.
Yeah, and you don't track those numbers either?
I can produce that information, so we
Okay.
can get some stats put together on the number.
Thank you.
I'll ask my partners to help me.
No, I
with
think it's a big deal, and Member Tigan brought up Measure 110. I'm curious, are any current positions being supported by Measure 110 money?
So, Josh, it goes back to the revenue sharing piece, I think.
So the funds that are supported, those come from the marijuana share. The Measure 110 reduced our revenue, but it's not funding any other positions.
Okay, thank you. Also, then, is there any way to tell how much time you and your team are spending on Measure 110 issues as a result of that?
No way for me to quantify this at this point. It's, first of all, it's still relatively new change, right? And so
Sure.
the whole system is trying to adjust to the impacts and make any correlations that might be there, or just it's too early to tell.
Okay, I understand that. I just know in my own personal experience that my personal experience number is way up with people experiencing crisis because they're on drugs that are now legal to use. And we're providing free paraphernalia to imbibe. And that's troubling to me. I think it makes it harder for everyone. That's about it. Thank you.
Member Nordyke?
Thank you. I just want to piggyback on what Councilor Hoy was just saying. The Salem Police Department has an intelligence support unit, and I will email this PDF to you.
Thank you.
The EDP-related calls for service that the intelligence support unit came up with shows a huge increase in EDP calls being answered by the police department since 2019. The number of EDP-related calls for service in 2019 was 2,719. 2020, it went to 3,646. 2021, 4,501 calls for service, and 2022, 6,123 EDP-related calls for service. And it shows that they didn't average. In the year 2022, they spent 3,039.4 staff hours on EDP-related calls. So it's become an increasingly large portion of the officer's time. And we know that officers are not in the business to be mental health crisis workers. And we really do need the right tool for the right job. And this is just a powerful reminder of that, for sure. The only other comment that I wanted to make is not really specific to Chief Womack and the work. And by the way, I want to extend my gratitude. Your team has been under immense stress lately. You've had a lot of really scary situations arise in our city. And so my gratitude goes to you and all your team. I can't imagine the additional stress from some of the recent calls for service that we've had, and the people shooting at police cars is completely unacceptable. So I just want to extend my gratitude on record for that. I do want to circle back to what Member Cohen said. At what point in time do we keep vacancies on the books? And I don't mean police vacancies, I mean any vacancies. At what point in time does the city need to decide that if you can't fill it in, I don't know, 8 months, maybe we should do away with that position? If that's what they do at the state, at what point in time do we keep funding a position that is not realistically going to be filled? Especially when we're being told over and over again how dire our financial situation is. And again, I'm not singling out a specific entity within city government. I'm sure we have vacancies across the entire city, but I would like to hear from staff perhaps at the next meeting, do we even have a policy for vacancies that are kept open for 6 months, 8 months, a year? How many vacancies get to a year of going unfilled? If so, maybe we should reconsider and apply that money where it's needed elsewhere, where it can be filled on a more urgent basis. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just for clarification, Member Nordyke, I just make sure I'm tracking. So if we have budgeted for some positions, let's say we budgeted for 20, but we were only able to fill 10, and now we're in the 9th month of the year, the suggestion is those other positions, we wipe them off the books and the money be directed someplace else? Is that, or?
It seems to be that's, at the state, it seems like that's what they do. They make amendments to the budget. This is the first that I've heard of this process, and I don't pretend to be an expert in it, but it's something that strikes me as an opportunity for dialogue with our city staff to give us guidance and suggestions on how best to proceed. So, no, I don't pretend to be an expert in it, but I think Member Cullen raises a good point about longstanding vacancies. We're in a position where every dollar counts. And if there's a way to save money without impacting our services in a negative way, then we should pursue it.
I'm good on clarification.
Thank you. Yes, Member Verney.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to mention, I think it's pretty indefensible for us to think about eliminating positions that are vacant due to no fault of our own. It's really difficult to recruit and try to convince people to take on a stressful job and be shot at and the things that they encounter. And my son's a police officer. I've looked at the changes, you know, in him through the years and what he has to face. And, you know, he was off work for a little bit because obviously they were understaffed. He responded to a call and was injured and ended up on the, you know, out of work for 5 weeks or whatever. And the reason that he didn't have any backup for that call, and he was assaulted because he was responding to an assault, was because they're understaffed. And it's not because we're not just leaving these positions open for fun. It's because people aren't just lining up to fill them. In addition, in our public, you know, our community city survey, one of the top issues that our community wants to address is what they see as an increase in crime. And there is an increase in violent crime. And when that happens, it pulls more folks off into investigations than having the people out on the streets that we need. And so I just can't see eliminating a position because it's vacant when that means that someone's not going to be there to respond to a call. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I've been struggling with trying to find my own words for this. Thank you for stating your lived experience. I think it's really powerful. Just because a position isn't filled doesn't take away the need for the original position. And I think that's really important to drive home. I know and I can feel what's happening to our city employees and the strain that they're under. I feel that the same way from employees at the state. The state is hurting, the state employees are hurting just as much as our city employees. And it might not be my position to say this, but I don't agree with how they do things. And I don't agree with how Oregon does our taxes either. So there's a lot of things that I'd love to change. But I wanted to say that, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to suggest that it would be a good time for about a 10-minute break.
I was about to say that. I also don't want to cut off Keith. Keith, do you want to maybe make a final statement and then we'll take a little bit of a break?
Thank you to everyone for your questions. Thank you to staff for your response. Yeah, I think a 10-minute break sounds like a great idea.
Great, thank you. We'll be back in 10 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. All right, we've had quite the eventful night. We still have 2 special orders of business to get through, and then some committee discussion. So I will hand it over to Josh to handle our results area for good governance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening. Again, Josh Eggleston here to present the 2024 proposed budget for the Good Governance Results Area. Some tough presentations to follow, but I'll do my best. This includes departments and activities providing support to direct services provided by the city. The programs contained in other results areas. Good governance has an expenditure appropriation of $125.6 million, representing 17% of the total city budget. The results area includes support services from multiple departments, including the city manager's office, finance, legal, and enterprise services. Program pages begin on page 43 of the city budget book, and there are 227.45 full-time equivalent positions providing services related to good governance. The proposed fiscal year 2024 budget includes an increase of just over 16 positions in this results area. With the recent increase in grants received by the city, a grants administrator is recommended to ensure compliance with grant requirements and reporting. 2 new positions in human resources are proposed to assist with labor negotiations and recruitment efforts. With the opening of the new Public Works Operations Building, 2 custodial workers are needed to maintain the building. Information technology includes 2 new administrative analysts to provide support for procurement and receiving, and 1 department tech support analyst to support community development. To add capacity in the new community services department, 1 management analyst is included in the budget to assist with financial management and analysis. And then there at the bottom, 0.13 FTE was added to create a 0.5 FTE management analyst in legal to add some additional department support for special projects. The proposal to increase the city operations fee revenue includes additional positions as well. 1 senior fiscal analyst in finance to provide needed financial planning and special project support. 1 assistant city attorney to expand general counsel capacity in the legal department. A supervisor in IT to lead the department tech analyst team. And 2 security guards at the Civic Center campus. In addition, the self-insurance fund, 1 human resources specialist to provide additional safety assistance. And then also there at the bottom, there was a limited duration full-time position recommended to convert to a permanent position for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Program Manager position. Most of the budget in the good governance area is similar to prior years, but there are some changes in fiscal year 2024. Included in the proposed budget is the 3rd year of payments of a 10-year internal loan from the utility fund to complete several projects here at the Civic Center campus. The projects include the customer service center on the 1st floor, which is set to open next month, pictured here on the slide. Another project was the transformer replacement for the City Hall and Library, which coincided with the seismic upgrades at the library. There are also a number of software upgrades or replacements that are needed in the legal department. The first is the prosecution case file management system, which will be a module of the new municipal court software system. The system is scheduled to be implemented by June 2024. And then also included in the budget this year are funds to engage a federal lobbyist to assist the city in obtaining additional federal support. City Council passed a motion in February to add this federal lobbyist contract, which is new to the city. This concludes the good governance results area. Staff are available for questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Are there any questions from members? Yes, Member Phillips.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Josh. I'm not sure if this is the right section, but I had asked a question at an earlier meeting about our use of photo monitoring at intersections, kind of the speeding as well as red light monitoring. So I guess my question is now the right time, and if it is, I've got a couple questions.
I think that's the next time.
Yeah, that'll be the next results area.
Okay, I'll wait.
Thank you. There's a lot packed into this one. Nobody has any questions? Okay. Member Curtis.
Thank you. I just took a bunch of notes when I went through this, but I'm a former communications director, and so I look at communications, and I think that's going to be really, really important as we go forward with our proposals, and to communicate with our community and make sure our message is clear and provocative. And I noticed that there's only 2.65 FTE for communications and outreach staff. That was page 51 is what I have in my notes, which seems really low for a city of our size and our budget. And I did notice that there was 4 new enterprise services staff, and I wanted to know if any of those new ones might be associated with communications and outreach. Is this too technical?
Appreciate the question. No, the new staff are not associated with communications. I should note, I think you're looking at the city manager's office. There are communication staff in other funds and other departments that you'll find in other results areas. So the communication function here at the city is not centralized, it's decentralized. So there is a core in the city manager's office, but there are individual positions in other departments.
Well, thanks for that. But I remember that the police chief commented that his entire public affairs unit was defunded or nixed. So I just have a concern that as we go forward and whatever decisions are made, that we put some real effort into thinking about communications, because that's how citizens learn about what we're doing. Most of them don't watch these hearings and don't know what we do, and communications is difficult these days, but it kind of often tends to be the thing that's cut first sometimes because it's PR and it's not considered, important. But I think if we want citizens to understand what it is we do, that's really critical. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Curtis. I know that has been the drumbeat of this council so far, just talking about communication and how are we telling our story and how we are reaching our community. So I appreciate your support in that as well.
I don't know, Keith or Courtney, does one of you want to talk about the communication work that's being conducted right now?
I will start, and I will look to Courtney to fill in any blanks that I leave. We do have an ongoing communications master plan that we're working on. We anticipate coming forward to City Council in July to present that work, and it will look at how staffing is provided and how it's distributed across the organization and whether or not there's need for additional resources there. Yeah.
I think we might be ready to move on. Yes, Josh, thank you so much. Thank you for presenting that. I think Callie is next on our agenda item for a safe and healthy community.
Good evening, Budget Committee. Callie Leinenbach, Budget Manager with the City. I'm pleased to present to you tonight the proposed budget for the Safe and Healthy Community Result Area. With the exception of the infrastructure area that we reviewed last week, the largest portion of available funding is dedicated to this result area. Detailed program information begins on page 97 of the City Budget Book. Proposed funding for the Safe and Healthy Community Result Area is just over $153 million. Programs in this result area provide services such as court proceedings, emergency medical and fire response, police patrol and crime investigations, emergency dispatch, and building permitting and inspections. Safe and Healthy Community has the most positions as well as the most funding, with 568.67 full-time equivalent positions that support services in this area. Workforce changes include a mid-fiscal year 2023 addition of 3 firefighter medics and 1 police officer to support the implementation of commercial air service. This fiscal year 2024 budget is the first budget where these positions appear. Also proposed is the addition of a training officer to manage the fire department's training requirements. A crime analyst in police will increase the department's analytical capacity and support strategic plan initiatives. The WVCC budget includes 2 new 911 call takers and a shift supervisor to help with increasing activity at the center. And 2 part-time police positions were converted into full-time positions, adding 0.9 FTE to the department's budget. An administrative analyst will provide increased domestic violence response, and a lab tech will create capacity to process crime scenes and evidence. With the merge of 2 departments, building and safety will now be under the new Community and Urban Development Department. And since the passage of the bond in November 2022, the fire department ordered a new vehicle fleet, which includes 16 fire engines, 2 ladder trucks, 2 brush vehicles, 2 ambulances, 1 heavy rescue vehicle, and 1 air rig. These vehicles will arrive over the next few fiscal years, with the earliest delivered this summer. The bond also provided funding to buy parcels of land to locate 2 new fire stations. One will be a relocation of Station 8 from the Chemeketa Community College campus, and the second will be a new station, Station 12. Municipal Court is in the process of contracting for a new software system, which will reduce manual processes and create efficiencies in court. This, as Josh said, this new system will be ready for use towards the end of fiscal year 2024. And with that, staff are available for questions on this result area.
Thank you so much, Callie. Yes, Member Allen.
I had 2 questions, both relative to revenue. The first one was on page 315 of the budget. Ambulance service, not sure if that's ambulance service fees or whatnot, but that line item has kind of gone all over the place. With a low of 94,000 a few years ago, and then a high of, in the current budget, of 3.8 million, and then it's back down to 742,000 next year. So I'm curious what's going on in that line item.
We actually identified today an entry error that affected this particular line item, so good catch. We'll be bringing back an errata next week to correct that.
Okay. I guess I'll wait till I see the errata.
Do you know what it will be or what it should be offhand? No.
One reason for the fluctuation is the activation of the fire department's medic unit that you heard from the fire chief earlier today. So if you look at the actuals back in 2021, they're very, very low. There's not much revenue coming in. But recently we, in order to support the private provider, we've activated a medic unit. We've done a couple budget amendments throughout the last couple of years in order to support that. The fire department's running it with overtime. We've done transfers. So we've seen additional revenue in the EMS fund, and then we've transferred it to the general fund to pay for that overtime service. So that's one of the reasons that you've seen that fluctuation, because we've seen the fluctuation too with the start-stop of assisting with that medic unit.
And so what is the revenue? Is it EMS fees?
So it's billing for transport services. So when we transport, we bill for that service.
Okay. And if I might have a second
Please.
one. Moving to fire, fire safety permits is more than doubling in the area of revenue, and what's going on there?
2 for 2. You found the second one. And actually, thank you to Councillor Hoy. She asked the same question earlier this morning. I quickly answered it, along with lots of other questions today. And then I got a call from the fire department saying, "Hey, we got to look at this." So there will be another errata. It's basically a double entry. It got entered twice.
Okay. I'm I don't know where else to go.
Yeah, I kind of think that we need to get this man a plaque for next. Could we do that? That's amazing.
That is amazing.
I really enjoyed that. It looks like Member Phillips has their hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Josh. So this would be the section to ask the question about the red light cameras?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so I guess I'd like to start with a recap. How many intersections right now utilize the red light cameras that also assess for like speeding?
I believe it's 6 intersections currently.
Thank you for that. I'll accept 6. I guess my follow-up question is, are they set up in a way to generate revenue? Is that their intention?
No, that's not the intent. The intent is to change behavior. And if you look at, I believe it was last week, we provided a report. Based on that, you can look at their annual report they're required to submit to the legislature, I believe. And you can see that change behavior. So some intersections still generate quite a bit of traffic, especially some where it's just transient commuters going across maybe, I'm blanking, on Mission, going on 22. People aren't familiar with maybe that it's a red light camera there. So we get a lot of out-of-state people that we see at the police department and at court for those items. But no, it's not meant to be revenue generating.
Thank you, Josh. If I may, just a couple follow-ups. So when you say change behaviors, my understanding is our goal is to get people to drive safer and to not violate the rules like run red lights and drive too fast. Is that what you mean by change behaviors?
Yeah, that's correct. The intent is not to collect revenue. The intent is to reduce traffic violations. So the goal would actually be to get to where we don't see any traffic violations. And there are some fixed costs with the system, but a lot of that is citation based for when it's issued. So the cost goes way down if we don't issue the citations also.
Okay. And then are these intersections based on like the volume of traffic? Do they essentially somewhat cover the cost of having them? Do they kind of pay for themselves a little bit?
I know some of this. I'm going to defer to see if the police chief wants to respond.
Council, you're exactly right. The purpose is not to generate revenue at all. It's to be a self-sufficient system. So all revenue that's garnered from traffic citations goes to pay for the system itself and its maintenance. So any increase, any new additions, any new intersections would have to have the level of traffic volume and violations to support the addition of the new camera. So that's why sometimes we get questions about, can we put a camera here or there? They're lower level intersections with not high levels of traffic. They don't support the system. So these are our high traffic intersections with a lot of violations, which also tend to have red light crashes. And so it's for safety and it's not a revenue generator. The revenues simply support the system operation.
Thank you. That's my understanding as well. Thank you for saying it for the public record. Are there any intersections that are close to having the volume that this could be expanded to without like rule changes at the state level?
I think there are other violations that we need to, other intersections that we need to assess further that could meet the criteria. So that usually takes us 6 to 8 months to go through the process because the vendor's involved in that too. They do an assessment of the intersection to make sure that there's enough volume there to cover the costs and justify the placement of the system.
Okay, thank you. I'm very supportive of the benefit of safer roads. So I think that they're worth the cost, and I appreciate the follow-up answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Phillips. I know every one of my neighborhood associations would like to have those at every single intersection in their neighborhood. Yes, Member Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. Putting on my state hat again. When I saw the software system replacement, alarm went up in my head because if it's over a certain amount or if it's very sensitive, the state requires us to go through a stage gate process, which requires independent QA and audit. So is the city going to contract with an independent QA auditor for the purchasing, implementation, and post-active follow-up just because IT, if you say workday as a state employee, it's a dirty word, right? So IT is something you don't want to mess with. You don't want it to go wrong because bad things happen. So just want to make sure we have that going for us. Thanks.
Thank you. And it looks like we might be getting an answer from Krishna Nimbari.
Thank you. So we do actually have the process to go through that, and we haven't purchased the software yet on this one. So when we go through that, we do have the project gate check process within the IT department. So does that not independent auditor? No.
Member Tigan.
Thanks. I'd like to ask a question, maybe of Chief Niblock, on page 100, the service area statistics. Yeah, page 100, just right after the opening tab. I think we could benefit from you explaining the cardiac save rate statistic, and I guess I would just like to say I appreciate seeing the relative increase and decrease in the number. Throughout this book, we're given a number, and maybe this is for Josh and the team to think about for next year. To see the trends in these numbers would be, I think, really helpful. And one trend that stands out on this page is the 40% decrease in the cardiac save rate. And I think that, I feel like we've talked about this in the past, in the last few years, and it feels like a really important point to draw when we talk about the amount of service needs going up while the ability to provide that service is effectively going down. So can you just give us a little more information about that?
Sure. So we use the CARES system, which is a nationally recognized system for tracking cardiac saves. So a save for us, I just want to define that really quickly, what a cardiac arrest save is. That's a person who has a witnessed cardiac arrest. Somebody does CPR on them. They may or may not defibrillate them on scene. When we get there, we have a viable patient. We transport them to the hospital. They get whatever definitive care they need at the hospital. And they leave the hospital with no neurological deficit, back to their lives, their jobs, their families, basically the way before they had their heart attack. That's a save. So it's a high bar. And that's a national standard that we follow. I think last year we saved 25 people in the community that had that type of an incident. Sometimes it's a plumbing issue with their heart. Sometimes it's an electrical issue with the heart, which is the sudden cardiac arrest that we talk a lot about. We had a person that was taught CPR in 8th grade by our CPR in Schools program saved their father last year. He's a senior this year. His dad had a heart attack. He remembered his training. He did the CPR. We got there. He was a viable patient, and he's alive and well. So that's what we mean by cardiac arrest save. So it's a high bar. So our numbers, and it's a good thing, actually. We had less cardiac arrests in the community last year than we had the year before. So when we have about 180, give or take, cardiac arrests in the community any given year. We had 148, I think, last year. So a lower number. So that can really skew your percentages of your save rate. And it does jump around. We've been as high as 70. We've been as low as 13%, which is horrible. But I think that year we had like 68 cardiac arrests. So it's not easy to save somebody who's having a cardiac arrest. It's a pretty difficult scenario. Everything has to work out just right. You got to get there on time. That's the biggest thing. Or you got to have a citizen who's been trained in CPR actually stepping up and doing CPR before you get there. And that just extends the timeline for us and gives us a viable patient. So that number is not what we want to see. And I think, I don't know if we have this all up and running yet, but on our website, there's a site where you can go and you can look at our key measurements that we track, like our response times and our code saves. And I think there's some historical data there too. So you could look and see, man, you're down 40% from last year, what's going on? But you could look at the numbers and see, okay, you had 168 last year versus 148 this year.
I appreciate that clarification, because I wouldn't want to go around freaking people out.
No.
When the reason for the decrease is
less cardiac
arrest, which is a good thing. Yeah, okay. But thanks for the clarification, and I appreciate 25 lives being saved that way.
Yes. Yeah, I think since inception, when we started keeping track, and it was 2014 or 2015, we've saved 168 people in the community. And I say we, it's the people that do CPR, people who get there, timely response, our friends in the ER, one of the Salem Health is a great partner, and there's a shameless plug for Member Phillips. They do a great job. We have a good relationship with them, and when we deliver viable patients to them, they do their very level best to get them out the door like they were before, back to their normal life and being with their family, having more birthdays and Christmases and all that stuff. So,
Thank you very much.
you bet.
Thank you, Member Tigan. That was highlighted in my book too, so I was glad you brought it up. Member Hoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Member Allen, congratulations on finding those discrepancies. For the record, I was first.
She didn't.
At least on one of them, anyway. I actually have a follow-up question for Chief Womack, if I may.
Please.
Chief, I meant to include this in my question a bit ago, but left it out. In the number of calls that you are responding to, what percentage are overdose deaths?
They've definitely, and thank you, Josh, for turning my mic on there. They've definitely increased. I don't know if I have the percentage with me. We can try to determine that too. But I did see recent statistics from the medical examiner's office. So overdose deaths in the city of Salem, not including the West Salem, the Polk County side, because I was talking to the Marion County medical examiner side, have more than doubled since 2019. So 2019, the number of overdose deaths in Salem here was 18, 21 was 43, and then 22 is not finished yet. There's still a lot of pending toxicology, but it looks like it's going to be around that number, close to 40 again. So it's definitely, we've seen a dramatic increase within the past couple of years.
And would you correlate that with Measure 110?
I don't know if it's too early to make that correlation, but the fact is overdose deaths have doubled.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chief. If you can stay there, I have a couple questions for you. In talking with your staff and reading your literature, we also have quite the increase in DUIs as well. I think that is something that we hear less and less about because we have so many other kind of scarier new things that are happening. But this is like, the standard one that we've had forever, but that's continuing to go up in our community as well. Could you speak to that?
And it's also in line with national trends too. So some of these things I want to make clear they're not just unique to Salem, right? But we're definitely seeing that here too. Obviously, everyone remembers the very tragic incident with the man who was DUI that killed 4 of our unsheltered members in our community. So those are definitely increasing. The number of DUI arrests, the number of DUI crashes. And I think that, people will ask why. I think there's still some post-pandemic things going on. I mean, nationally, the trends with just vehicle accident fatalities across the nation went up coming out of the pandemic. You can pontificate why that happened, but there's definitely some correlation between what we went through as a community and a nation through the pandemic and our driving habits and behaviors.
Yeah, I think there's also a conversation to be had around that direct link to access to mental health care, because so many people are choosing to self-medicate in ways that are detrimental to themselves and our community. And so that's a bigger, broader conversation than the Budget Committee. But I also wanted to ask you about graffiti abatement, because that is something that our neighborhoods struggle with a lot. Can anybody speak to that? I know we had 2 positions. We were down to 1. I hope we're back to 2.
This is another case of budgeted positions that we had vacancies for a while that we carried, right? We had some challenges filling them, but we filled them now. So there are only 2 budgeted graffiti abatement positions with our department. That's the way it's been for a number of years, and those positions are now full. So we're fully staffed in that area. So they're busy continually. We're seeing an uptick in graffiti. Some folks are probably just recognizing it in their communities as well. So we're constantly chasing down those complaints and trying to get ahead of those abatements and removals.
It'd be really interesting to learn where they're being reported, how it's, how quick we're going to be able to get responses to different areas of town to make sure that we're tackling all of those different challenges. Because I know there's some that are pretty harmless, it's still a crime, but there are some that are gang related, which also pose an increased threat to especially our young kiddos here in town. So I would love to see some information on that as well.
Great.
Those are my questions. Yes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Great segue. So the graffiti, I took a picture last night of some graffiti that was downtown. It was in front of a business. I'm pretty sure it's probably still there, so it's good to know those positions are filled. But my question is, it's not about graffiti, because obviously, that is a concern. My question is more around, paint us the scenario. The scenario that when a phone call is made and you have people from your team show up and from Chief Nabok's team show up, can you paint that scenario for us? Like, what does that look like, feel like, and sound like? And the reason I want you to paint that scenario, it's only because I would like for the community to hear who shows up to what. For example, if we go to some places downtown and we know that the unsheltered population is sleeping on the street, right? Sleeping on the street. Well, I'll paint the scenario for you. How's that? Since I got the paintbrush, I'll do the painting.
Yes.
So they're sleeping on the street, and let's just say that a fight breaks out between them, and somebody driving past decides to call 911. They're not going to stop. They're going to drive and call at the same time. Who shows up to that?
The police. We show up to that.
Okay.
If there's a threat of violence or some sort of active crime, criminal behavior happening, then the police are the appropriate response, and we respond.
Okay, so same scenario. Let's say that they have decided it's cold outside and they've built a fire at the corner. Who calls? See. So the reason I'm doing this is because I would like the community to see who gets called for what. It's a fire, small fire, unsheltered or making a fire because they're cold, they're sleeping on the elements. But it's the calls. It's the calls and the why behind it. And sometimes I think that those scenarios, I think they're overlooked or they're forgotten because you make a call, somebody has to show up.
That's right.
You care to speak to that scenario?
Yeah, I do want a couple of clarifiers there. So one of the things, especially in the wintertime when it's cold, we try to be humane with outside fires. We consider most of them recreational fires. If they're warming or cooking or whatever, they're living outside, that's a tough place to live. If it's causing danger to property or they build it in the stairwell of the parking garage, for example, that's not acceptable. And so we go extinguish those fires. We try to educate them. That's not always well received. And as we said before, some of them are having mental health crises or they're on narcotics and they're not cognitive to really receive any education. But we try to be mindful of the fact that they're living outside. It's cold, wintertime. So there are warming fires that we allow as a recreational fire, just like you could build a fire in your fire pit in your backyard and sit around it and enjoy the fire. You have a warm house to go to afterwards. They don't, and so that's the kind of the tact we've taken with that. Now, if it's a nuisance to the neighbors or those kind of things, we try to respond to those. But I'll tell you, we've stopped responding to a lot of the ones we know are outside just because we don't have the staff to do that.
Right.
We're running to the critical calls, and so that's one of the things that we've kind of reduced our amount of response to. We don't have people to do it, so we could spend all day driving around from fire to fire to fire in the wintertime.
Oh, I'm sure.
Educating people that this isn't a good thing to do. So.
Right. And one final question. On what page is this? 117. You share with us a graph that 21 and 22, person crimes, property crimes, and society crimes, and it looks like society crimes have gone down this year, or rather last year?
Definitely. Can you guess why there's a dramatic drop?
No, I don't want to guess. I want the experts to tell us why
it's narcotics arrests, and so with ballot measure 110, with the decriminalization of
110.
So
got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So society crimes are quote unquote victimless crimes, where the crime is a state of organ, right? So drug possession, gambling, things like that. The crimes that aren't stealing property or victimizing people that way. These are quote unquote victimless crimes, and so that's the biggest difference there we're seeing is just the reduction in any arrests for low-level narcotics possession.
And would you say for those calls, both entities are showing up?
Usually don't get too many calls on that unless, like Councilor Hoyes mentioned, it's trespassing at a business and someone's maybe smoking methamphetamine. Now that's not criminal behavior, and so there's nothing we can do about that. And so we'll still go because of the trespassing, but we can't use the methamphetamine smoking as a tool to try to encourage movement, for example.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes, it looks like we have Member Phillips and then Nordike.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief. And Chief, I think we've kind of entered the topic, and I know this is the Budget Committee meeting, but I guess my question is in regards to, something like overdose, which has increased for the past several years in a row nationwide. I mean, I think it was 2021, we had nearly 98 or 99,000 overdose deaths in this country. And last year, projections are over 100,000, which were 10, 15% increases over the prior pandemic times. Is there something that we could do as a community? Is there like an unmet need? I know public health doesn't normally go through cities, but like, what are we doing in terms of getting Narcan to the people who need it most when they need it most, which is one of the most effective tools that's been shown to increase the length and quality of people's lives when combating this difficult,
So I think quickly I'll just say too, obviously it's fentanyl that's in the system now that's so much more lethal, right? So that's obviously part of why overdose deaths are going up across the nation. And naloxone, for example, all our officers have that. They've had it for several years. We deploy it regularly. I shared a story recently with the city manager yesterday, actually, where one of our officers saved a life in the field. Somebody was overdosed by using naloxone. So we have that. All of our firefighters have that, and our medics that respond. So all the first responders in this city are equipped to do that, and we do it regularly, actually. As far as extending that out into the community, there probably are other ways to do that. But from what I know, we're doing our part on the public safety side to make sure that we're equipped and trained to use it.
Thank you. That's great to hear that, we've got it to our first responders now, and that you're saving lives as recently as a few days ago. That's great. I guess my question is just, where could we build on that to get more people the help they need when they need it most? But it's great to hear that we've already taken the important first steps.
Well, we've increased the amount we carry. As the chief mentioned, we're seeing more lethal mixtures of fentanyl in the drugs that people are taking, and that relates to more overdoses and more deep overdoses. It takes more Narcan to revive somebody, so you might have to give them 1, 2, 3 doses to wake them back up, and sometimes they don't wake back up. And so we've increased the amount that we carry in our ambulances, in our fire trucks, so we have those extra doses. If we have to give somebody 3 doses, we've got them right there. And that's a sign of the times, but normally we could just give them a shot of Narcan and they'd wake right back up. But when you're talking, you're mixing in veterinary strength fentanyl and carfentanil into opioids, the dealers don't care what lethal mixture they have. So that really does have an impact in a community and on the responders. I do know that there was some movement for a while talking about getting Narcan out, and I think the state OHA is working on this, if I'm not mistaken, to try to get that. It's over the counter that people can get, so they could possess it themselves, if they have somebody who's a drug user in their family and they want to have that, which is, then they can have it immediately available. So I think it's available over the counter now, or they're moving towards that. So that may get more of it out there in the community. But we do use it a lot. And some of our saves are just that, overdose saves, that they go into cardiac arrest because of an overdose, they stop breathing. We give them the Narcan, we get them back, and they're alive again. So,
thank you, Chief. I just got done reading American Cartel about this topic, and it's really a fascinating and scary topic, but good to be educated. Now, the city manager wanted to comment on this, and then we'll go to Member Nordyke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In response to Councilor Phillips' question about what else we might be able to do, we are in the situation where we are accumulating funds from the opioid settlement, and there's some opportunity to direct funds to community education, to responder wellness. For example, we're looking at the opportunities there, and also to help support people in treatment and response. So there's definitely opportunities to do more with the dollars that we're accumulating there from the opioid settlement.
Thank you. That's a really great point. Member Nordyke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is for the Chief Womack. The behavioral health team is identified on page 118 of our budget books. We know after Councilor Hoy's comments earlier today, there was some interest in the number of EDP calls, and the stats that the department has collected shows a consistent and, may I say, meteoric rise in EDP calls over the last several years. However, I see that for the fiscal year 2023 budget, the behavioral health team is staffed at 4.75 FTEs, but the proposed fiscal year 2024 budget recommends just 2.75 FTEs. Can you explain what the rationale is?
Yeah, that team is a co-responder model. So you've heard me talk about this before, but when we talk about EDB calls, response to folks in crisis, there's a big variety there. And I'm going to oversimplify this, but in my mind, there's a spectrum of response that's required. All of it needs to exist and be properly funded. So there's a law enforcement response. Let's say you have someone in crisis who's about to hit somebody with a baseball bat. You're going to send a police officer to that, not a qualified mental health professional. Then there's a co-response model, which we have here. This is what we're talking about. A police officer riding in the same vehicle with a qualified mental health professional responding to calls for service where there's possibly a safety component, but you have your qualified mental health professional there to provide the services and try to de-escalate the situation. That's what this is. And then you have CAHOOTS, or non-law enforcement response models, which are Marion County and Polk County are both expanding out also right now. So I think we need all of that, and you should never take from one to fund the other. They all have to be adequately funded. So that's my overarching speech on crisis response. Here, the difference here is that on the Polk County side, so we had a team on both the Polk County and the Marion County side, and the Polk County side ended that funding for us, and so that team discontinued on that side. That's why there's a reduction of staff there.
So Polk County ended their co-response team?
They still have it. They ended the funding for our Salem police officer on their team, so they're still running with the sheriff's deputy and a qualified mental health professional, but we're no longer part of that team.
Okay, all right. And there's no change. What about a co-response model with Marion County? Is that still going?
Yes, it has been. And, it's changing. The dynamics are changing because the funding comes from the state to the county to provide that, the funding for that program. And so it's status quo there. But the new funding that's coming, the additional funding that's coming down from the state is directed at law enforcement response, especially Medicaid billable services. And so the county is expanding teams there that have to do much more with a mental health medical response that don't fit the co-response model that we have. So they haven't cut it, but they're not necessarily adding to it either.
Okay, I appreciate that. The comments I have, I've been a huge supporter of a civilian-based unit, and I still am. But I've always been a supporter also of the co-response model, and I've voted to approve it many times, whether I was on budget committee as a public member or as a counselor. I guess I'm sorry to hear that that program has gone away with Polk County, because there certainly are situations that are too dangerous to send just civilians to. So, if that's the recommendation that makes the most sense, I understand that. But I just wanted to show my support, because there are times when you do need a co-response model. Yeah. So anyway, for what it's worth, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Counselor. And this is a model in Salem that's existed for over 20 years. Mm-hmm. It's nationally recognized as a preferred practice for this co-response model. So my opinion since I arrived 2.5 years ago is we need more of that. We need 24/7, 365 coverage. With 2 officers assigned, you don't get 24/7 coverage. We should expand that if we could. So I've had preliminary discussions with our partners from behavioral health on the Marion County side. They're open to expanding it. They just don't have the state funding stream coming anymore. If funding came from the city to expand that, they would be open to that discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Member Nishioka.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to go back to, and I'm not sure if it will be Chief Nemblock or Chief Womack or someone from Financial. So we have police officers, and I don't really know how to ask this question, but I will try to see if I can explain what it is I'm wanting to understand. The firefighters are working overtime. And when there was the discussion of having hold for positions, which it sounds like the question was for police, you're holding salary wages to hire people. It seems to me that we're over, because they're working overtime, that budget is expanding, and I'm trying to understand how that works. And then police were holding, which is something that I know we need to hire more police officers, so I'm okay with, but I'm just trying to understand this difference and what that actually is costing us in the sense of overtime for police.
I'll take a first stab at it, Mike, but just generally too, there is quite a big difference between police and fire, especially when you start talking about overtime, because fire department is necessarily focused on response times, right? And so you need a certain minimum staffing to make sure you're at least meeting those minimum response times. So if 2 or 3 people or firefighters are sick, I think you're filling behind those mandatory overtime. You're filling those spots. Police are a little bit different. Typically, we don't have a set number of mandatory cops on the street every day. 3 people call in sick, we go short that night. So there's just a different way that overtime applies to both departments. But yes, the more vacancies we have also, we are having to cover more gaps with overtime, so it increases our overtime. But it'll just have to be explained differently the way it's managed and used between the 2 departments. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yes.
Yes.
Typically, if we're fully staffed, and over the course of my career, we've usually been 2 or 3 overhired. We have authority to overhire 2 or 3 positions. So throughout the year, if July 1st we're fully staffed, that's our biggest overtime. In the summertime, people take vacations, they want to be gone. So we want to have full staffing at that period of the time. And as we go throughout the year, we may lose people through attrition or retirements. And if we can come out about even, then our overtime experience is more balanced. And we can predict, we know we have so much sick leave, and so we look historically and we calculate that out. We know we have vacations that we have to schedule and Kelly days off for firefighters, and so those all get filled, and we have floaters. We have floater positions that aren't assigned anywhere, and they fill those positions. So once you get out of floaters, then that's when you start hiring the overtime. When you're down 20 people, that's 6 or 7 per shift, or 8 per shift. That's 8 vacancies. And if you have a minimum of, let's say you can have 6 people off on vacation a day and you can have 4 people on a Kelly day, well, that's 10 people. And if you're down 8 already, you got nobody to cover those holes once they get the 9th and 10th person off. So, and that doesn't include sick leave, FMLA, long-term injury leave, disability leave, people having babies. I mean, all the things that happens in life. It happens to firefighters too. We have a younger department now, and so they're having babies and living life just like, which is great. But you still have to be able to cover that spot when that person's gone. And we have chosen not to close fire stations on a day when we didn't have enough people to staff. That has a dramatic impact on the community. You close Station 3, which is Lansing. They run 4,500 calls last year. You close that station and all the stations around it are going to have to run those calls for that day, and that just messes the whole system up, and so then you put people's lives in jeopardy. So our staffing model is we have a minimum number we have on every day. We fill that number every day, whether it's through people doing it voluntarily, and sometimes, most of the time we do it that way, or we mandatory people. We catch the off-going shift and we say, hey, you got to work another 24 hours, sorry. And that's just how it is sometimes.
Thank you both for your explanations. Thank you.
Thank you. And Chief Niblock, could you just very briefly explain a Kelly Day? Because I don't think everybody knows what a Kelly Day is.
Sure. So our firefighters work a 56-hour work week. So that's like a regular 40-hour person working 7 days a week, if you add that up. And a Kelly Day is a day where the rest of their shift works and they get that day off. So it's a work week reduction to try to get them closer to a 40-hour work week. They still work a 24-hour shift, and they get a Kelly Day every so many shifts. So it's a day when they're off work, they don't have to be at work, and the rest of their workmates that they normally work with are at work. So it's called a Kelly Day. And they have 12 Kelly Days right now, and then the new contract that's TA'd, they'll have 15 a year. So, and that is going to help us be very competitive with other agencies in the state to try to recruit firefighters to come work for us.
Thank you so much, Chief. I appreciate that.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I have one more question.
Okay, we'll take one more question and then
One more question.
We'll move on.
I'm pretty sure Member Cohen's going to love this question. So you mentioned earlier, like an hour or so ago, talking about, when you respond to fires, especially if it's a state building, like if there's a fire in a state building, you don't go there and be like, oh, it's a state building, we got to turn around. No, you put the fire out, right? So when it comes to money, and maybe this is a question for CFO, how much does the state give us for those responses?
Zero.
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 I was making sure that everybody knew that that's zero.
Zero.
Because at the end, and it sounds kind of comical, but it's a serious situation because you can't divvy up what city and what state. Your team responds, period. And so even if there's no money involved, you're still showing up. And so I want people to see there's value in that so we can understand that the people in uniform are doing their best with what they have, and it's still going above and beyond. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a wonderful point made. Now it is 8:50. I would love to transition us to the next point, which is the committee discussion. Any questions that you all have for staff? We have technically one more meeting next week. We do have another one tentatively planned if we need it. But this is your chance to ask questions of staff. Yes, Member Allen.
There we go. Thank you. Generalized questions. This pertains to the responses, page 31, the addendum tonight. This is the city manager's response as far as new positions and when. I just want to make sure I understand. It says positions listed under A and B, and I add 29 positions in A and B, would be hired either 30 days after passage of a payroll tax ordinance or a successful vote of a ballot measure. I assume the ballot measure is also related to the payroll taxes. You're just covering bases depending on how it gets enacted. There's no mention, and A are the positions funded with the operations fee. So is this to say that if council passed the operations fee, that there would still be no FTE addition until the payroll tax came into play?
If I may, so the passage of the ordinance happens a long time before implementation or collection of the payroll tax. The idea here is that the fiscal year 2024 budget is deficit spending and it requires additional revenue in the forecast. So once we're assured that that revenue is coming with passage of an ordinance or passage of a vote, in this case a payroll tax, we can go forward with those positions. Otherwise, say we get to, say it were to go to a vote in November and it failed, we need to reevaluate those positions because we'd be looking at a much different situation, looking at other reductions. It doesn't make sense to add positions if you're going to be looking at reductions.
Clarification on my question. The council adopts an operations fee increase in July. Okay, so there's been no ordinance passed for the payroll tax, nothing else, just the operations fee. Would that trigger hiring of FTE? Because this answer says that it would not.
You are correct. It would not trigger hiring.
Okay.
Yeah, so they'd be authorized, but it's a management decision whether or not you hire them or not.
Okay, I was just trying to get clarification on that. One, I need to give a call out to the finance team because I know just how hard it is to try and turn around the information as quickly as they do. That is a Herculean effort. And so I'm in awe of what they are able to do in such a short amount of time. So I just want to make sure I said that. And then I'll just end with comments that I've made before. It was mentioned last week, I wrote it down, that projects stay out of the CIP until funding sources are identified. I think maybe FTE should abide by that same rule. And again, we talked about good governance tonight and manage the enterprise to be fiscally sustainable. I have been more than convinced that there is a need for additional support within city government, but I don't know if having the FTE in the budget and not identifying in the budget what the revenue source is to pay for the FTE is the right thing to do.
Thank you, Member Allen. Yes.
Just to be clear, there is revenue in the budget for every FTE that is included in the budget.
I am aware that it's using fund balance in order to do that.
That is correct.
And I believe, I think I did the math, about 50% of the fund balance is required to pay for all of the FTE that's in the budget. I mean, wasn't the fund balance going down by 50%?
So this is where it gets a little nuanced, and I apologize for that. So if you're talking about budget appropriation, yes, you're correct. You were authorized to spend it if you were to fully expend the full police department budget, full fire department budget, spend all $3 million of contingency, yes, you would eat up half of the fund balance. The reality is that we do experience savings. This goes to Member Cohen's question about vacancies. So we manage those appropriations. We expect savings. So we look at the cash flow. We look at our forecasts. So we expect savings. So we only anticipate, I believe it's about $11 million of fund balance being spent.
Then I just want to quickly restate it. Then to see the FTE in the budget in a sustainable way, which is the good governance creed, for lack of a better term.
I like that word. That sounds good. Yeah. Yes, Member Nordijk.
So much to everyone for all the discussion and to all the staff for all that they do. So I wanted to give a couple homework questions / assignments for staff. First of all, thank you for including a little bit of background information on the last time we had a conversation about an auditor for the city. Just in case you didn't see it buried in the materials, the last time Budget Committee voted on whether to have an auditor, the vote failed 9-8, exceedingly close. It's one of the reasons why I brought it back up, is to understand and get the impression whether this Budget Committee, which is almost completely different from 2017, has more interest in it. In your materials tonight, there are testimonies from 2 auditors, and both of them have indicated a lot of information that I find intriguing and I would like to have staff follow up on. First of all, there are some commonalities in their testimony. Discussion about the ability to find cost savings and efficiencies, that the cost of an auditor can be offset or pay for itself by identifying efficiencies and improvements in existing city services. Another theme that I keep hearing is that I feel like we may be too big not to have an auditor of some kind. When you look at what Steve Bergman, who has been an auditor for 10 years, he said that state agencies with biennial expenditures of over 200 million and or 400 employees or more have to have at least one internal auditor. We blow that out of the water. We have almost 1,400 employees. Our budget is hundreds of millions of dollars per year. So for these reasons, that's why I bring it up. I am bringing it up as an opportunity to have a discussion as a group here about whether it can increase accountability and transparency. But the questions that I have for staff, and this is something that I understand is really important to having an auditor matter. How do we ensure that this person is independent? How do we ensure that we're not just hiring someone who will tell the city what they want to hear? So I would like to find out a little bit more information. And I think what it would take is taking a look at what another city, like Eugene, for example. The city of Eugene has an auditor. They're comparable in size to us. I would like to know what they do to provide that level of independence. When I did a little bit of research on this today, in between breaks on my day job, it looks like the county of Deschutes has an independent auditor, and they have an auditing committee that is staffed by members of the public and county officials, and that auditor reports directly to the highest levels of county government. So what I would like to find out is, here's a more precise question that I know Josh prefers. How much would a city auditor position cost? Because that's an actual number you can give me. But more generally speaking, what best practices could we look at to ensure that this would even be an independent position, a position that both the city and the public could have faith in? I think that's worth asking, and it's worth perhaps calling up the auditor in Eugene or calling up the Deschutes County auditor and ask them, how do you ensure that you're independent? Are you able to talk to city staff and get what you need? Are you able to request data without getting pushback or getting silenced or getting intimidated? So it is something that I'm very interested in, but it's a project worth doing right or not at all. So those are the questions that I have for staff, and I'd love to get feedback for next time. And in the meantime, I encourage folks to talk to your residents and see what they think about the concept of having an auditor for this city. To me, I feel we're definitely big enough to do it, but I want to do it right. And the only other point I would make is that both of these auditors who gave testimony said that one auditor is all that you need to provide oversight and objective assurance. Could you do more with 3 or 4 of them? Absolutely you could. But both auditors were quite clear in their testimony that even a single internal auditor for a city of the size could make a difference. So those are my questions for staff. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the questions. Just one quick piece of clarification. In your regular agenda, question 5, we did provide a cost for an internal auditor position, approximately $160,000 for that, a manager 2 classification. We had HR look at what would be appropriate. One thing I should note is that a single person, it might be difficult. Usually there's a couple other support staff for an internal audit office. So it would be a challenge to do that as an individual, so the cost would be increased for those other 2 support positions. But we did provide the cost for that position.
Thank you.
Yes, Member Chirac.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was wondering, when staff was looking at the need for additional FTE, was there also consideration of whether a given function, whether such as IT, maybe legal, some others, could be accomplished as well or better by outsourcing? And I think I'm remembering from the Moss Adams staff capacity study that was done, a lot of the comparable cities used outsourcing more than Salem did for several types of services. So how did you consider that very much? I'd kind of be interested in if we're missing maybe opportunities to save by doing some services. Obviously, a lot of types of functions would not be suitable for that.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. There have been, over the years, a few iterations where we've looked at outsourcing certain services, and we could certainly take a look at that again. I think Christian and Burry might be able to provide a little more insight. And then for these specific positions, I don't think it would really be applicable with the functions we're looking at.
Krishna Namburi, the Deputy City Manager. So we, just to kind of give like a little bit background history on this, 15 years ago, when you kind of look at the IT's budget, we were spending quite a bit of money on consulting services, right? So we would ask people, consultants, to come in and do the work. So then what we kind of learned is that was getting way too expensive for the city. So then we kind of moved into, for half that cost, we can actually develop like staff internally. And we kind of went into this model of self-sufficient IT. Relying on external resources is extremely expensive in the information technology world. So we kind of moved away from consultants and moved into self-sufficient IT model. We also started doing application development internally so that we can reduce the cost of the software purchases. So going back to other cities that are actually outsourcing, so when you kind of look at the budget, overall budget that is spent on the IT department compared to other cities, we are actually much lower because the outsourcing costs are very high. So if I'm looking at the total overall budget, we are actually much lower than other cities. Hopefully that answers the question. Okay.
Thank you. Member Phillips?
Thank you, Chair. So this is a question for kind of maybe summary purposes and just make sure I'm tracking. I know that our budget is on page 31, really just step A of a 2-step process. On the supplement documents tonight, we got like a 50-page information added, and A and B are the city manager's attempt to kind of describe what's coming. So right now on our plate as city budget members, we're really looking at A, but as also a member of city council, I get the sense that we really need step B too, or step 2 as well. So in a hypothetical where we have A and B, or steps 1 and 2 done, how does our reserves look in the out year? I think we've already discussed it in weeks past, but I know we go down a little bit or quite a bit in year 1, but what does it look like year 3, 4, and 5? Could you remind me, is it growing, shrinking? How's it look?
So I think you're referring to the scenarios we prepared last week. I think that's true. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, so the scenario where we implemented the payroll tax January of 2025, the fund balance did fall below fund balance policy year 2, and it stayed below fund balance policy for the following 3 years. You'll notice in the third, fourth, and fifth year, the fiscal year impact, you start to add fund balance back as the payroll tax is fully implemented, and we get a better collection rate. So does it make me uncomfortable that we're below fund balance policy? Yes. The other direction doesn't look that great either. So yes, you see a dip down, and then you go back up. Another scenario that one of the members requested and was included in your packet was an implementation of a payroll tax on July of 2024, 6 months sooner. With that implementation and then the associated new services still starting in fiscal year 2026, so you have a full year of collection before you actually add any additional services, you do maintain a positive fund balance for all 5 years of the forecast.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. It was surprisingly helpful. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you to the member who asked for that. That's on page 26 of our additions tonight. And it's really interesting to see what that change does. I don't like seeing red on budgets, my personal one or the city one. So it was really great to see this example of a way that we could get there without going in the red. Thank you for that. Are there other questions for staff? Yes, Member Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I also really appreciate the time we've had tonight for the in-depth information and discussion. It's been very helpful. It certainly reinforces my belief that we can't cut our way to better city services. I do support an increase in the operations fee as one way to address some of the difficulties that the city has. I do continue to have several concerns about the operations fee increase as it's proposed. First of all, the fee does undercharge large commercial customers at the expense of residents and small business owners. And I believe, well, I've heard that work to correct that imbalance is going to take roughly another year. Second, the addition of any staff under the operations fee increase could be put off if a proposed payroll tax failed. Third, I believe it would be helpful for everyone to see what the overall plan would be for solving what the city has identified as a structural staffing deficit of more than 300 positions. Maybe that's a combination of revenue increases, significant revenue increases even beyond what's been proposed, and some reorganization. But it would be helpful to me to know that that planning was underway, that there was some way to put the money from the operations fee increase and the positions it would provide in the context of a longer plan to solve that 300 position deficit in some way. It does appear from the information that we've received, that we got at the last meeting, that a budget with no new staff positions and no increase to the operations fee would protect current employee FTE and their contracted pay and benefits while producing an ending fund balance that complied with council policy. And with all of those factors in mind, I'm debating whether to support an increase in the operations fee for the 2024 budget. At this point, I lean toward delaying it for another year to give the city time to balance the operations fee burden to clearly reflect the system demands of large commercial clients and to develop a long-term plan to deal with staffing shortages. I look forward to new information that staff might provide and to further discussion.
Thank you so much, member. Not sure if any staff have any comments. I think it's something we can definitely talk about this next week, for sure. Any other?
Member Dixon, I'm not sure I followed. I'll ask, but since I'm not a member of staff. So are you suggesting that if the increased operations fee wasn't included in this year's budget, the 2024 budget that we're discussing, that we wouldn't be, that it wouldn't break council policy? Because I see this is yet last week's chart, the proposed budget shows that the increased operations fee would bring in $5 million, and we'd be under council policy by 135. So if we didn't include the operations fee, we'd break policy by 3 and some.
And I appreciate the question. I'm actually referring to 5A in the information we got last week, which has an updated general fund 5-year forecast with no new positions and no increase to the operations fee.
Okay, thank you.
That's what I'm referring to. And in 2024, it stays within the fund balance policy. And clearly, going forward from that, it becomes a serious problem, and one that I would not want to perpetuate.
Thanks for clarifying what your starting point was.
Thank you.
I guess my response to that is, as I think about it, Member Dixon, I know everyone wants to go home, but whether you're starting on chart A or chart C, the severity of the things that we've heard tonight under the safe and livable community program area, either one of those scenarios, without another revenue solution, and in very short order, those stresses are going to get worse. The response times are going to get worse. And I'm not suggesting that you're arguing otherwise, but it's just for everyone to recognize that the operations fee is just the start of what the city needs in order to maintain any semblance of what we enjoy for services right now. And if that next revenue doesn't happen fast enough, then, and that's the gist of this chart that you see tonight, if that second layer of revenue doesn't come fast enough, the precipice comes quicker, and we know that.
Sure, Member Dixon.
May I respond? And I appreciate your point. I would never argue that the city doesn't need significant amounts of new revenue and that it doesn't need it very quickly. What I'm suggesting is a 1-year delay in the implementation of the operations fee to give the city time to rectify what I see as a significant imbalance in its impact, and to put the staff that would be added on a firm footing so that they're not vulnerable to the possible loss of the payroll tax money, and that they can fit into a larger plan, again, to address this more than 300 FTE long-term deficit in staffing. I'm not in any way suggesting that we don't need the money or that it shouldn't be implemented.
And after watching and participating in these budget committees for 6 years, to skate yet even closer to the cliff that we know we're skating perilously close to would certainly make me nervous.
I had a quick question for staff. If we were to pass an operations fee increase, and then in a year when we get the new technology that will allow us to put in some more equity into this, there is no reason to say that council could not readjust across the board, as in reduce for some and increase for others. Am I correct in my thinking?
Yeah, that's correct. It's completely in council's purview.
Okay, thank you so much. That is something that I would love to speak with you about. Maybe offline, you and I can connect. Member Dixon, I'd love to chat with you about this. Are there any other questions for tonight? You all have been fabulous. It's a really fun night here today. Lots of good conversations. I'm forever an optimist. Yes.
If I may, you have one more scheduled meeting. We did notice the next Wednesday also as a meeting. I think sometimes it's helpful at this point in the conversation to have a reality check. Can we actually complete the recommended budget at next week's meeting, or do you feel like you'll need that additional meeting? And if so, who is actually able to attend that following Wednesday for the budget committee? One thing that's interesting about the budget committee is it's not a simple majority. You have to have 10 members to recommend the budget. With our timing that we have, it's really important that we get that budget recommended. If not next week, it makes it even tighter the following week. But it's really important that we get that process going and prepared for the public hearing in June.
And Josh, how would you like members to get that information to you, whether or not they can make it?
I mean, one thing that kind of works, if you know right now, just a show of hands if you're available on that Wednesday. So it's the 17th, right? Yeah, that's correct.
Oh, actually, I am not.
You're not.
I could be.
There you go. There you go. The power of influence.
so
Didn't you just
persuaded.
hear perilously close to the cliff and you're not going to show up for the last meeting?
It's the cliff I'm afraid of.
Yes, it looks like we have everybody who can come. So
Yeah, that's extremely helpful. And then if there is there a consensus that we should go ahead and make that meeting scheduled, or would you like to wait until next week to move forward?
I heard some yeses, so I'm going to go with that. Let's go ahead and get it on the books, and then we can cancel it when we do the fabulous work we're going to achieve next week.
Excellent, thank
And
you.
Madam Chair, just for clarification, we've heard that word a lot tonight, clarification. Will staff have enough time to answer Member Dixon's questions in regards to preparation for next week?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, staff.
Okay. All right, with that, we are adjourned, y'all.